Say hello to a couple more people. We got Eugene, David, George, Todd, Randy, Steve, Jerry, Jim, Doug. Excellent, excellent. Good morning from Manila. I think you probably win the distance award. All right, y'all. Perfect. All right, so let's get rocking and rolling. So as promised, we are going to talk about bluffing today. Now, I want to say a couple of things before we start firing into it. One, you will get a replay tomorrow via email. So if you have to, jump out for any reason, real life comes up, or you just get tired and fall asleep, no problem at all. You'll get a replay of all of this. That being said, I am going to do a Q&A at the end, and there's also a free bonus at the end that you're definitely going to want to stick around for. If you catch the replay tomorrow, you'll still get all that stuff, but you won't get the live Q&A, of course. So we're going to have fun with that. And because I am doing the Q&A at the end, and I probably will do a decent length Q&A, I'm not going to check the chat the entire time. It's very, very distracting. I have really, really bad ADD, and my ADD is actually really kicking my butt today. So I'm not going to check the chat all that much. So if you have questions, please save them for the end. We will get to them. Like I said, there will be a Q&A, and I do suspect there will be a lot of questions. This stuff can get pretty darn heavy. So with that said, let's start talking a little bit about bluffing. So as you already know, the name of this webinar is called Brilliant Bluffing. The whole idea is to start talking about a system for firing with air. So before we kind of jump into all that kind of stuff, like I did mention, there is going to be a special bonus at the end. So in order to help you kind of get a clear foothold on the number of bluffs you should be firing on each street, I made a very, very awesome cheat sheet. So stick around to the end. I'll give it to you totally for free. No problem at all. It's really helpful. Once we start going through some of the hardcore stuff through this webinar, you're going to see, okay, having a clear starting point is going to be very helpful. That's what the cheat sheet is going to give you. For those of you that I have not met yet, first and foremost, hello and good morning. My name is James Sweeney. I am that handsome bearded gentleman in the middle, and that is my wife and our son. And a lot of you know me better as SplitSuit. I've been playing poker since about 2004, so playing for almost 15 years now and coaching for about a decade of that time. Over that time, I'm probably best known for my best-selling book, Dynamic Flooring Poker, but I also do the YouTube channel stuff. I co-founded Red Chip Poker. I released a major course called the Hand Reading Lab. I've done a bunch of workbooks as well. And chances are, if you've seen a lot of training videos, particularly on YouTube, you've probably run across me once or twice. So hopefully we're meeting each other for hopefully the 50th, 100th time. But if this is our first, thank you so much for hanging out today. We're going to have a lot of fun. For the record, I play mostly live nowadays, but I also came from an online background. So I'm very familiar with both. I work with both in terms of student load, so I can definitely help you out. And what we're going to talk about today is going to apply everywhere. Whether you play tournaments, whether you play online, whether you play cash, whether you play six max, whether you play whatever the heck, everything we're talking about today is going to apply. So what are we doing today? As you know, we're talking about bluffs, but honestly, what I want to do is arm you with usable shortcuts for figuring out how often you should be bluffing. And then if you are going to be bluffing, which combos are going to offer the best bluffing potential. Because honestly, most people guess when they're thinking about bluffing. They don't know how often they should bluff. They don't know what goes into good bluffing. They just say, I think I'm going to bluff here. And if they've been around a lot of poker training, a lot of coaches are like, hey, play aggressively. So they say, okay, I'm going to bluff a lot. But when and why and with what and for what size? Right? Most people have no idea. They guess a lot. So what we're going to do today is really focus on giving you a starting system, a little back pocket strategy, so you always have a starting point when it comes to bluffing and figuring out how often to bluff. So in this webinar, just a very, very simple outline. I'm going to start by talking about the foundation and the rules of bluffing, give you some very simple starting points to work off of. Then we're going to go through some examples. That's going to take the bulk of the time. You'll see why as we really start hacking through them. Again, we're going to do a Q&A, so if you have questions, make sure to save them. And then we're going to go through the extras and the bonus that I talked about a moment ago. That all sound good to y'all? If so, let's rock and roll, and we'll get started with those rules. All right. So the honest truth is that most players are terrible bluffers, like we already talked about, right? Most people are either going to do one of two things. They're going to bluff far too often, or they're going to bluff far too rarely. So I'm going to fire up a quick poll in the chat. If you've never used this software before, it's actually pretty slick. So here's a little question that I want you to answer, and be very, very brutally honest. Which camp do you fall into? If you had to finish this sentence, being very self-reflective, you bluff fill in the blank. Do you bluff too often? Do you bluff too rarely? Or do you bluff a perfect amount? That was cute. I saw 4% of y'all said a perfect amount for a moment ago, and now right back to 0. I applaud the humility and the honesty. All right, give this another, 5-10 seconds. See what y'all are saying here. I love the people that are saying a perfect amount. All right, guys, let's end this poll right here. So what do we got? 22% of y'all said that you bluff too often, 74% said too rarely, and a very, very minute amount said a perfect amount. So the honest truth is almost no one bluffs a perfect amount, myself included. If I had to answer this totally honestly, I'd say I probably bluff a little bit too often. But that being said, it's not uncommon to see people that are being really honest here say they bluff a little bit too rarely. Now, if we think about that, that's because bluffing takes a little bit of risk, and most people are pretty risk averse. Most people don't want to risk a lot of money without a lot of certainty. So if they have good certainty that a bluff is going to work, they fire it. But a lot of the times we don't have that kind of certainty. And that's very, very important. So keep in mind this exact kind of result, right? We have hundreds of people watching this right this moment, and most people admittedly say they bluff too rarely. How does that relate to the people that you play against on a regular basis, right? That's pretty important. So let's talk a little bit about the rules of bluffing. So we have a starting point when it comes to doing this and knowing what we should be looking for. So if we're going to answer the major question, how often should I bluff? We can do this with two very simple rules, and these rules are going to frame your entire strategy. And if you've been following some of the stuff we've been releasing over the last 6 months, you probably already know what these rules are, but if you don't, we're going to go through them real quick. These rules are going to give you a starting point and a baseline for having an actual strategy in your game. Because without these rules, most players are going to be left to relying on absolute hand strength. So they're going to say, okay, I'm going to continue if I have a strong hand. If I don't have a strong hand, I go away, right? They don't bluff with it. They don't call down enough of the time. They just fold and get rid of things, or they check and then fold on the next street. And we don't want to be this person. Folding a ton is not a legitimate strategy. Waiting for big hands is not a legitimate strategy. Here's a rule that helps form an actual strategy. Rule number 1, if you bet and get called, you should usually bet again on the next street. Now, if you've never seen this rule before, that's okay, but I want you to say it with me one time. If you bet and get called, you should usually bet again on the next street. Okay, that's rule number 1. Now, rule number 2 is going to look a little similar to this, but if you call on this round, you should usually continue on the next one, okay? And continue is just a combination of calling and raising. Essentially, it means you are not folding. So again, say it with me one time. If you call on this round, you should usually continue on the next one, okay? Think about what these rules are really telling us at the end of the day. What they're telling us is that we should usually continue. Usually is around 70%. Sometimes it's a little higher, some spots it's a little bit lower, but on average, we're usually going to continue about 70% of the time. So again, think about those rules for a moment. Let's go back to rule 1, right? If we bet and get called, we should usually bet again on the next street. So we're saying we're going to check less. We're going to fire more. If we're firing more, we can't manufacture more strong hands. So if we're going to fire more, inherently every extra hand we add into that firing range is going to get weaker and weaker. And eventually it's just going to be total air and nonsense. So again, this is a major formulation rule that most people just inherently ignore. The people that are just waiting for big hands and are only going to bet if they have a strong hand, think about it. They inherently break this rule on a day-to-day basis. And if you identified as not bluffing often enough, you break this rule, 20 times a session, like most people just inherently do. Now, rule 2 is also very important. So rule 1 essentially has us checking less, firing more, right? Getting rid of some more passive actions, increasing some more aggressive actions. Rule 2, very similar, but here we're just not folding. Right? We're going to continue more often. And again, we can't manufacture more strong hands. So as we're continuing, every extra hand we throw into that continuance, either by raising or calling, is inherently going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. If we fold too much, we have a problem. Okay? And say that with me one time if you've never really thought about that before. If you fold too much, you have a problem. On the contrary, when you find opponents who fold too often, they have a major problem. But that problem doesn't get exploited unless you follow rule number 1, which is to fire a lot of the time. And how many people do that? As we already talked about, not enough people do that. Okay, so we kind of get all that, right? We've hammered through the rules. We understand, okay, fire more, fold less, do so with intelligence. Don't go crazy, right? Notice we didn't say, hey, continue 100% of the time. Hey, c-bet 100% of the time. Hey, 3-bet 50% of hands, and then always c-bet flops and always barrel off, right? We're not saying always, right? What we're saying is usually, most of the time, probably more often than you currently are. At least, again, 3 times as many of y'all said you bluff too rarely. This is the kind of stuff you need to be hearing, and we're going to show how this works in a little bit. So if you understand this, right, if you understand the basics of, got it, continue more often, sweet. But when we're betting or raising, how often should we be bluffing? Right? It's not like we're going to like call with bluffs or anything like that. Sure, we're going to float sometimes, but more often than not, when we're talking about bluffing, we're talking about betting, or we're talking about raising. So how often should we be bluffing? And what percentage of my range should be value versus air versus marginal stuff? So again, let's do this in the polls. So check the chat real quick. I'm going to ask this very simple question. Okay. On average, what percentage of your aggression range on the river should be bluffs? Assuming you bet pot on the river, how much of that should be a bluff? Take a moment, take your best guess. Do you think it's 10% of the time, a third of the time, half the time, or 2/3 of the time? How much of it should be air? Okay, give you guys another 5 seconds. Boom, boom, boom. Excellent. All right, so what do we got here? 75% of y'all said about a third of the time, and 10% said 50% of the time. 11% of y'all said around 10% of the time. The answer, as most of y'all got it right, is actually a third. Okay, so if you potted on the river, you should have 2/3 of that range be value, 1/3 of that range be bluffs. Now, if that makes no sense, or you're wondering where the heck that came from, give us a second and we'll go through it. But let's start by actually going through this on a street-by-street basis, right? So again, we're just going to take that zoomed out, big picture. How many value hands should we have compared to our bluff hands? Now, on the flop, if we zoom in here, on the flop, you should have 1 value hand for every 2 bluffs. Now, some people who have never worked through this stuff before are probably looking at that and saying, how the heck is that true? How am I going to have so many bluffs on the flop? How does that make sense? Well, see how this hammers out and how this plays through. Okay, so on the flop, we have 1 value hand for every 2 bluffs. Now, when we go to the turn, that changes. Now, in the turn, we have 1 value hand for every 1 bluff. Okay, so we're 1-to-1. So half our range of value on the turn, half of it is bluffs. Now, on the river, as we already talked about through the poll, we should have 2 value hands for every 1 bluff. So again, 2/3 of our river range should be value, and then 1/3 of that should be a bluff. Okay, so you notice that as you go through street by street by street, you're having fewer and fewer bluffs make up the density of your range. That's really, really important, and a lot of people mess this up, either by c-betting 100% of the time on the flop, and then they have too many bluffs in their flop range, or c-betting too tight, they have too much value density early on in the hand, and again, they still allow their opponent to play pretty darn well against them. But there's a couple things we need to keep in mind here. Number 1, very few players bluff often enough, right? The people that are here, the people that are hanging out right this moment with you watching this webinar, most of them admitted that they don't bluff often enough, okay? And what this means is these are people that your fellow brothers and sisters who are watching this right this moment, they study the game. They think about the game to show up on a weekday night to watch this webinar to study their game and try to improve. And they still admit that they don't bluff often enough. Can you imagine what the players who don't do any studying are doing in their game and what their strategy looks like? Hint, they're also not bluffing often enough. Number 2, these ratios, right? What we just talked about is on the flop, we have 1 value for every 2 bluffs, turn 1-to-1, river 2 value for 1 bluff. These ratios assume that there's enough stack depth to play all streets. Now, I bring this up because a lot of tournament players, and players that play really shallow cash as well, but tournament players especially typically play stack depths that are much shallower than cash game players, right? Most tournaments are played somewhere between 20 to 50 big blinds through most of the tournament. Sure, in the beginning, maybe it's close to 100, but ultimately through the end of the tournament, in the middle of the tournament, typically you're somewhere between 20 to 50 big blinds. So you don't have enough stack depth to play all streets. That's really, really important. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about something later that kind of explains why this can change and how this actually gets factored in. But at the end of the day, tournament players, you're not going to have the stacked up to play all streets. And as such, these ratios kind of shrink up on you a little bit. And maybe on the flop, you get a little closer to 1-to-1. And then on the turn, where that's your pure commitment street, then you're at that 2 value to 1 bluff. So again, there are some slight differences between tournament and cash, but only because cash you usually almost always have the stacked up to play all the streets, and as such, these ratios typically apply more perfectly to you and more regularly. And number 3, this is your back pocket strategy. Okay, when you have information, you can adjust these ratios, but you should almost never have 0 bluffing range. Okay, now let's just talk about this real quick. When I'm talking about back pocket strategy, I mean, this is stuff you can always revert back to. If you have no idea who your opponent is, or you've played like 20 hands against them, but you don't really have that much info on who the heck they are, or how often, they're going to be folding here, or how often you should be bluffing, now you do. You have a starting point when you don't have any other information to work with. Then you can just stick to this, right, on the river, that 2 value to 1 bluff, on the turn 1-to-1. You have a starting point for formulating your own strategy on the fly. You know what your starting point should be. Now, again, this is not saying that abandon everything, right? If you're playing against a huge nit, well, on the turn, I'm going to have a lot more bluffs in my range. I'm not going to be 1-to-1 against a nit, because a nit, I think, is going to fold far too often on that street. And as such, I'm going to start bluffing far more often. Now, if we take the opposite side of that and say that our opponent is super fishy, I don't need to have 1/3 of my range be bluffs on the river, because that dude's not folding. So all I'm doing is throwing money on fire every single time I throw more bluffs into my range against that dude. So against that guy, against a pure ultra fish, okay, maybe I really have 0 bluffing range on the river, or typically more on the river. It's very rare that I have 0 bluffing range on any other street. But there are situations where information is going to trump this. Again, this is a back pocket starting point. When you have information, deviate accordingly. And one other very, very important thing is that these ratios occur when we're firing for about the size of the pots. Okay, if you are firing for smaller than that, then bluffs will make up a very different density. So we're kind of simplifying here. We're talking more about pot size bets. And I know a lot of people don't use pot size bets very often. Maybe they use it when they're on the value side of the spectrum. They're really trying to mash value through. But at the end of the day, a lot of people just don't use pot often enough. And there's a lot of good benefits with pot. Other than it just being scary, it oftentimes simplifies your ratios because you can use the ones we just talked about. And again, you have a really solid starting point. So I know this is a lot of stuff all at once, but again, try to digest it as best you can, and this stuff will start sinking in slowly but surely. So you notice that what we're talking about here are frequencies, and then these frequencies turn into actual ranges. So hypothetically speaking, this is what we just discussed. This is what it would actually look like on a street-by-street basis. So let me zoom in a little bit. Try to get this up. So you notice this is post-flop value versus bluffing combos. On the bottom, we have a flop betting. On the turn, we have that in the middle, and the river is up at the top. Green is value, red is bluffs. And I will zoom in just a pinch more in a moment, but just bear with me for a moment. So if we started pre-flop with, what do we got? We get to the flop with 347 combos. This is what it would actually look like if you were the pre-flop raiser. You get to the flop with 347 combos, and you're going to bet, you get called, you bet the turn, you get called, and you bet the river. This is what it would actually end up looking like, assuming 70% per, right? So you notice that on the flop, we're only betting 243 of our original 347, and then that number goes down on every single betting round, right? Because we're shifting out some hands on every single street, because we're only going about 70% on the flop and about 70% of the turn and about 70% on the river. But here's the really interesting thing. If you notice on the flop, we have 80 value combos. And then, of course, based upon the ratio, right, we should have one value for every two bluffs. We have about twice that in bluffs. So we have 80 on the value on the flop and 163 in terms of bluffs. Okay, that's pretty easy. Going into the turn, we notice that we crack back to 1-to-1. So we have 80 value combos on the flop. 80 value combos on the turn and 80 on the turn in terms of bluffs. Okay, going into the river, you notice that again, we shift back. We use that ratio of 2 value to 1 bluff. So on the river, we have 74 value and we have 37 bluffs. Here's the really interesting thing, in case you didn't kind of notice this. On the flop, 80 value. On the turn, 81 value. On the river, 74 value. So you notice that that number actually stayed fairly flat all the way throughout. And again, this is a very, very zoomed out look at value to bluff ratios and what that looks on a street by street basis. But here's the other part of it. Notice what happens to the bluff combos. On the flop, we have 163 of them. That is a lot of bluff combos. On the turn, we're down to 81, and on the river, we're down to a mere 37. Right? So what you're noticing is each street, yes, we are betting fewer and fewer combos, right? Because again, we're not betting all of our combos on every street. We are betting more often than we probably do, but we're not going nuts. We're not saying, hey, bet 95% of your combos. And the ones that are going away aren't the value combos, right? You notice our value combos stay pretty flat on a street by street basis. But the bluff combos, those drop massively, because our failed bluffs, those are the hands we're getting rid of on a street by street basis more often than not. Starting with 163 on the flop and ending with a mere 37 on the river, that's a really, really important thing. But how many people do you know that are actually doing this, that are anywhere close to this, right? Not many. And here's the real thing. In real time, you're not going to be combo perfect. That's not the goal, to be combo perfect. But if you can be close, if you have a ballpark of what close looks like, that is a huge, huge leg up that like nobody else has. Because not only are most of you guys hardcore students of the game or students of any capacity, but most of this is probably new to some extent to you as well. And if it's newer to you, it's completely unheard of for the average person. So make sure to keep that in mind, right? So if this is seeming like kind of difficult, a little too complex, every little bit of this you get, even if you only take 5% of what we talk about throughout this webinar to heart and actually implement a little bit into your game, that is a huge leg up over your opponents who have no chance and have never seen this stuff before. Okay. So again, we've talked a little bit about this, and these are kind of my major 3 focus points when it comes to playing. One is focusing on my frequencies. I need my frequencies to be right. If I'm folding too often or if I'm bluffing far, far too often, either way I can get myself in a lot of trouble. Now, if I'm doing that, if I'm changing my frequencies away from what we just talked about as being pretty good, and if I change that, it better be a direct response to information I have on my opponent, or that the board texture changed in a significant way, or there's a legitimate reason. If I'm just changing my frequency because I didn't hit strong enough, and that's the end of my rationale, that's a problem. So always focus on your frequencies. If your frequencies are off, you're going to be a target. If your opponent's frequencies are off, they are a target to you. You're looking for that in fish. You're looking for that in nits. You're looking for that in old man coffee. You're looking for that in tags. You're looking for that in the really good players as well. Everyone has frequencies. You can't hide from them, but you can pay a lot of attention to them. You can pay a lot of attention to your own and make sure that you don't make yourself totally face up at any point. After frequencies, you focus on your ratio. Again, we already talked about what that looks like on a street-by-street basis. And then after that, you focus on exact combos. We're going to talk about exact combos today. Going to run through some examples and show you what that actually looks like. But ultimately, these need to be your focuses. Here's what normal people do. Normal people don't focus on frequencies. They don't know what they are. They don't know what the heck ratios would be. And combos are just a foreign thing that people talk about in strategy videos. So most people focus on trying to hit hands, trying to get paid off, and trying to be really tricky and use tells. And that's about the extent of it. So again, you can give yourself a leg up when you start focusing on these things. Yes, it's going to be a little tricky at first. If you've never done this before, it will be a little complicated, but I assure you with practice, it gets much, much easier. So if this is your first time seeing this, it's not uncommon for your poker brain to be saying, this can't be right. This doesn't make any sense. This is far too complex. This is something I've never heard of before. This is something that I've never seen before. And as such, how could it possibly be correct? If that's you, don't panic. My brain did this, the same thing, said, no, this can't be right, the first time I came across this as well. So a lot of this comes from Poker's 1%, and Poker's 1% comes from applications of No Limit by Janda. And this stuff seems a little complex and crazy at first, but honestly, these ideas are very heavily based upon GTO principles. And while they may not be optimal in all situations, how can they be negative EV? And I say that being very, very honest with you, because this is the first question I had to ask myself when I came across this stuff. I said, okay, how could this be plus EV? How could it be negative EV? And when would this work and when would this not work? So again, we already talked about two very distinct spots where we would not use these exact ratios or these exact frequencies, right? If we're playing against a huge fish who's never going to fold, if we play against a huge nit who's going to fold far too often, those would be situations where using these raw back pocket strategy ideas would not be optimal, right? There are better ways that we can go about abusing those kind of player types. But let's say you and I were going to play together, okay? And I tell you, I'm going to play this strategy to the T. How are you going to beat me? Seriously, think about that for a minute. If I play this exact strategy, exactly what I just told you, to the T, to the combo, to the frequency, how are you going to beat me? Where's your edge going to come from? And when you answer that question honestly, you recognize, holy crap, I do need to know this. Now, it's not that you're going to use this in all situations. Again, I'm being totally honest with you. There are a lot of situations where you play against huge fish in a really splashy game or huge nits in a really, really tight game, and you're not going to use this as a pure default. It's not going to be it. But you need to know what it looks like as a pure default to know how and when to deviate. And that's the really important thing, okay? Again, this stuff is your back pocket strategy. When you have information that says, hey, if you adjust this way, this is going to be more optimal, rock and roll. But if I tell you, hey, this is how I'm going to play, this exact strategy is what I'm going to use against you, and if you can't figure out how the heck to beat it, that should tell you something very, very important. So if your brain's saying, hey, this can't be right, this is too new, this is something I've never heard of before, this is something that if it was true, I would have already heard about it by now, don't panic. Sit with it. Again, go through the hand histories with me as we go through the rest of this webinar. But trust me, this is really, really important stuff. Even if you know your game is soft and you don't need to play perfect GTO, and trust me, no human does. Anyone who says, oh, I play GTO, they don't. They're a clown. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. Honestly, they may use some GTO principles, but no human, honestly, can play GTO. They can't. It's far too complex. In order to play like perfect GTO, it's absolutely banana pants. If you guys have gone through any sort of like solver stuff and just done a solver on a single hand history, and you go through and you look at like the way that the solver prioritizes combos and the way that they mix things up and how they do it to that level of precision, no human brain can do that in real time. They can't. I promise you. So anyone who says, oh, I play perfect GTO. No, you don't. It's not a thing. So again, this is based on GTO principles. It's the big picture idea. And that's going to be something that's very, very important. Again, you're not going to play perfect GTO. That's not the goal. Your goal is to have a back pocket strategy that's super strong, that's based in legitimate principles, and then you know how to deviate, when to deviate, and why. That's going to allow you to be extremely powerful, to move up, to defend yourself, and to do really great things. So to that end, I need you to be a freak. Okay, I need you to focus on your frequencies. I need you to stop checking so damn much. I need you to stop folding so damn much when you face bets. I need you to stop bluffing so rarely. I need you to focus on their frequencies, your own frequencies. I need you to focus on defending yourself from exploits when you're playing against strong players. And I need you to focus on their frequencies and find exploits against them. So that way you know, okay, do I need to use kind of my back pocket strategy, or can I optimize my range somewhere along the way? Again, there are plenty of times where I look at, okay, what does my 1% strategy say I should do here? And is this a spot where I should deviate? If yes, I deviate. And honestly, I deviate a lot. But I still have a starting point. And if I don't have information, I always have something to do other than just hope that I catch a strong hand. Because here's the honest truth. That's what most players do. They're just hoping to catch strong hands. And that's not a legitimate strategy. Okay. So that is going to kind of sum up this first part. I am going to kind of open it up to the floor for a moment. If y'all have any like basic questions on this, again, we are going to go through a couple of hands, but I'm going to get a quick sip of drink real quick and let me know if y'all have any like big picture questions. Excellent. Game theory optimal. Yep, GTO is game theory optimal. You guys are 100% correct. Edward, yes, I do think it is funny if someone says that they play perfect GTO, because they don't. Eric says, what about preflop? Eric, that is a great, great question. And what you're going to notice when we're going through some of the hands, you're going to notice what the post-flop range construction tends to look like. And then you're going to say, okay, based upon that, how does that affect preflop? Because what you're going to notice is we're going to use some different ranges preflop, and that's going to kind of change things a little bit. One example is from the cutoff, another example is from early position. So that's going to change things, and you'll see exactly how. James, yeah, 81 plus 81. I think there was a rounding thing going on in the spreadsheet. I automated it. Jones says, can women get away with bluffs better than men? 50-50. I'd say men are very, very polarized. Okay, and again, like I'm just talking broad picture. It's a really, really good question. I just talked about this with a student the other day. So I find that men tend to approach women in very, very polarized ways. Either they give them tons of respect, in which case, yes, you can bluff them with impunity, or they give them like no respect and think they're going to just outplay women because they're women, which is just a bonkers thought process. So it's kind of a know your guy kind of deal. And yeah, against a lot of guys, you can bluff with impunity. They're going to give you far, far, far too much respect. I know someone who claims he plays perfect GTO PLO. They do not. Al said, what do you mean by ratio? So ratio, I was talking about that in terms of, I'll go back to the rules. Ratios. So again, like back on the flop, we talked about having one value for every two bluffs. That's a ratio. On the turn, 1-to-1. On the river, 2 value for 1 bluffs. Good. I'm glad we were able to clarify that one, because that one's definitely going to help as we go through to the hand. Okay, so Rod says, would you change your bluffing strategy for sit and goes? Again, we're back to that major question of where these ratios kind of stem from is that you have enough room to fire all streets. When you're playing a sit and go and you're playing with really, really shallow stacks, you don't have room to fire all 3 streets, right? Usually your commitment point is pre-flop or on the flop, maybe on the turn. So those ratios are going to push up much, much faster. So likely on the flop in a sit and go, you're not going to have 1 value to 2 bluffs. You might be 1-to-1. You might be somewhere in the middle between 1-to-1 and 2 value to 1 bluff. Jason says bluffs equal pure air semi-bluffs monster draws. Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit in the examples. Bluffs, I know bluffs is kind of a broad term. Greg says, can you clarify the term combos? Combos are simply how many different ways you can make a hand. If you have no idea what I'm saying when I say combos, you can pause here, go open up YouTube, type in SplitSuit combos, 2 words, and watch that video real quick. Should be like 5 minutes long. Right. Repo says deviations from pot size bet based on actual bluff to value combos arriving at various streets. So I'm not going to go into that in terms of like breaking it down, but where it comes from in terms of, I'll give it to you on the river and let you kind of work your way backwards. So if you bet pot into somebody on the river, you're giving them 2-to-1 on a call. Okay, so you're creating indifference to their bluff catchers if you have exactly 2 value to 1 bluff. Now, if you are betting smaller, say half pot, you're giving them 3-to-1, then you would have 3 value for 1 bluff to create indifference in the bluff catchers. So that's where it comes from, and then you rework that backwards. That should help get you started on that one. Again, I don't want to go outside of the scope of this webinar. Steve said, are there any major differences in these principles between tournament and cash play? Only what I was talking about in terms of effective stack size and how that affects the ratios themselves. Herb says, will this work on wild crazy players? Again, we kind of talked about that a little bit. You have to think about what kind of folding there is, right? Is that wild and crazy player going to fold a lot? If they're not folding very often, where's your motivation to bluff them a tremendous amount, particularly on the river? So yes, everything still works on a crazy player, on a tight player, on a 6-max table, on a full ring table, on a live table, on an online table. It doesn't matter. because this is all just rooted in mathematics. But again, you still have to use the information you have, and then you make the discernments based upon that. Again, that's the difference between using the back pocket strategy, which says, okay, I don't know who my opponent is, how they're going to react. This is just what I'm going to do, and take the steering wheel off and show it to them playing chicken, versus I have information and I optimize my range accordingly. All right, so I'm going to call that one good for the moment, and let's get into some hands, because I think sometimes this helps if we get into some hand spots and kind of show how this works in real time. So we got 3 of them. We'll see if we have the time to get through all 3. Anyone who knows how I do hand histories knows that it can take a little bit of time, and I don't want to hold you guys up all evening. So we'll see what we can do. So let's just visualize a couple of different spots. Let's start with this one. This is from 2-5 Live. We have, just zoom in here. So, okay, here's the spot. So pre-flop, hero opens to $20 from the cutoff. Kelly calls from the big blind. On the flop, Kelly checks. Hero c-bets. Kelly calls. All right. Kelly checks the turn. Hero bets 100. Kelly calls. On the river, Kelly checks. Hero bets for 300. Awesome. So board is king 9-6, 3 on the turn, ace on the river, and here hero is firing off with a bluff. So let's do a quick poll real quick and see what y'all think about this one. So, where are we? So let's ask this question. Which of these combinations do you like the most to fire with here? You can fire with 8-7 of hearts. You can fire with Jack 10, the hand that we have here with the 10 of spades. Or you can fire with 6-5 and turn your pair into a bluff. Which one do y'all like the most? And again, check the chat box. You guys will see the poll right in there. Boom, boom, boom. All right, give you guys another 3-4 seconds. Not a lot of people in love with turning that pair into a bluff. Now they come out of the woodwork. All right, give you guys another 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Bink. All right, so 45% of y'all said that y'all liked taking 8-7 of hearts, turning that into a bluff. 37% of y'all said do it with this hand, and 18% of y'all at the very last minute came in with turning 6-5 into the bluff. So keep these results in mind, and we'll keep that in as we dial in through Flopzilla and see kind of what some of this stuff looks like. So let's fire in here and start from the very, very beginning. So we have Jack 10, but again, we're going to look at this in terms of a range and see if the range we create using the rules that we already talked about, if we use that range, if the hand we actually have ends up in it. If yes, we did something right. If no, maybe good, maybe not, but we'll talk about that as we go through. So let's talk about this and say from the cutoff, I don't know, I'm probably opening pretty darn wide. I don't know about y'all. What do you want to say? 30%, 45%? I'm going to say 45%. I'm probably opening pretty darn wide from the cutoff, and I think a lot of y'all are probably doing the exact same. So let's say that we decide to open with this, and the flop comes, what, King of Hearts, 9 of Spades, 6 of Spades. And of course, for those of you that are watching this, clearly we do not use Flopzilla in real time. Right? We don't use this when we're playing online. We don't use this when we're playing live. This is all stuff we use, and we review hands off tables. That way we start to build an actual intuition and know what to look for, what would look good versus what would look bad, and build some actual intuition to use when we're playing in real time. And here's the honest truth. If you never work with this stuff off table, you're never going to have a good idea on which bluff combinations work best, how many bluff combinations you should have. This is all very, very important stuff. So I'm going to make one quick change to the sharing. I'm going to turn my screen share off for a moment. I'm going to turn it right back on. And I'm just going to show y'all Flopzilla. So hopefully it turns a little bigger. Y'all can see that, right? All right. Someone can just say yes in chat when y'all can see only Flopzilla, not the hand behind it. That would be excellent. I know there's always like a 15-second delay in chat. All right, y'all. Thank you. There come the floody yeses. Okay, so let's just bash through this a little bit and, again, see if our Jack 10 kind of fits the bill going through here. So remember, on the flop, we end up firing a c-bet for roughly pot, and our opponent calls. Let's see if our hand fits the bill. So there's two major things we need to keep in mind when we're building this. One is the frequency. Again, that means getting this number down here up to about 70%, and then also making sure that our ratio is correct. Now here, that's going to mean somewhere between 20 and 25% of the range should be value, and then the rest of it should be in the bluff spectrum. Cool. And like someone asked earlier, the bluff spectrum is kind of all over the board, and we want to prioritize the best bluffs and probably weed out the ones that don't make the most amount of sense. So in this situation, if we were to fire all of our sets, all of our two pair, all of our overpairs, and all of our top pairs, that gets us up to 18%. Well, clearly we know we need to bet more than that in order to get to 70, and we need more than that to make sure we have enough value combos. But the thing is every extra combination we add in here is going to get weaker and weaker. So the question is, should we fire more air and maybe make up for that on another street, or maybe we think our opponent's folding too much, or do we start saying, well, maybe some other things fit in a little closer to value here? So pocket pairs below top pair, that's what? Queens, jacks, tens? Okay, that could fit the bill for value. Middle pair, well, not like value in the purest sense, but there's certainly enough of that. And you notice that once we throw that in there, then all of a sudden we're already up to 33%. So I'm going to check pocket pairs below top pair. I think most people would polarize their range here more often than not, and polarization as a bare bones default is going to be the preferred shape. So let's check those behind. Let's bet middle pair, and then at this point, pretty much every other combo we add is going to get weaker and weaker. And I think at this point, I'm comfortable with my number of value combos. And again, every other combo here is just going to get weaker and weaker from there. Now, flush draws, we have a whole bunch of them that we could bet, and we can definitely make some decisions or some discernments between whether we fire, say, King X of spades, Ace X of spades, treat that a little bit more showdown value, treat them all as flush draws and just fire them all. I'm not going to get into the ultra nitty gritty here. I'm just going to say, just to make things a little bit simpler, let's just consider flush draws a bet. Let's consider open-ended straight draws a bet. Let's consider gut shots a bet. And you notice, even firing all of that, and I know most people don't automatically fire gut shots, or at least don't consider them automatic fires. And mind you, there's a lot of them here, right? We could make a gut shot with 75, with jack 10, with queen jack, with 10-7. So yeah, even if we don't consider that much strength, you notice we're still only up to 50. We need to get this up to 70. So we need to really start stretching in order to get that done. So let's put in 2-card backdoor flush draws. Those are, things like Ace X of hearts that come out the back door. And some of this is going to be overlapped with like gut shots and that kind of stuff. So I'm comfortable with that. We're up to 52. And now I'm just going to start breezing through and saying, okay, what do I want to prioritize next? I'm going to prioritize my weak pairs. Now, I don't want to say that Ace-6 is the exact same thing as pocket fours. I'm going to prefer Ace-6 because Ace-6 has more improvement possibilities, and that's something that I definitely prefer. Now, if you're using FlopZilla and you've never done this before, very simple. If you click here, it's going to include all weak pairs. I don't want to do that. I only want to include some. So you right-click it. That allows you to start filtering, and you choose all the ones you want to include. So I'm going to include all the 6X ones. Boom, boom, boom. Good. And do I want to go 7s and 8s? Why not? Definitely going to need some more combos in there. So at that point, we're up to 62. All right, well, we still need some other stuff. So now at this point, I have to say, okay, do I want to include no-made hands? And mind you, some of this stuff is already included between 2-card backdoor flush draws and gut shots and all that, or ace high. Well, I don't know. Ace high, we have some of that in the 2-card backdoor flush draw. Let's just say we're going to take some of the ace high. Well, if we take all of it, we get down to 86%. That's too high. Let's right-click it, filter down to about half, and we're at about 73. I'm good with that. I'm going to lock this in. And again, when we're studying this hand off table, my question is the hand I actually had within the range that I am deciding to play here? And of course it is. It's right over there in gut shots, right? Jack 10 offsuit. Perfect. No questions so far. Everything's looking good, comfortable. And again, all stuff we do off table, so that way in real time, we can have a better idea of, are we close or not really? So turn is what? The 3 of spades. And now the process continues again, and we still have to decide what are we going to continue with. So again, we start with value, and because we're going to try to be firing around 70% of the time, that should mean this number overall should get up to 70, and we should have about 35% of it be value and 35% of it be air. Cool. So if we have top pair plus as our value, that brings us up to 30%. We're a little bit shy. So I'm going to include my middle pairs. Let's include some of the stronger middle pairs. That work for y'all? So right click through there. Let's clear them all. Let's filter. Come on now. There you go. Come on. Stop. Good. So let's do ace 9. Comfortable with that. Let's do queen 9 as well. Accept that. And you notice we're pretty much right there at half. And just for the record, we can always go into combo mode if that's more simple for you. Me personally, I just tend to work in percentages. I work in combinations on the river, typically because the river has fewer of them and it's more simple to manage. But when we're talking about a pre-flop range that started with like 600 combos, sometimes it can be a little tricky to think in combo form. So I'll just kind of work in percentage form for now. But you can work in either, whatever one works best for you. And again, if you're newer, this is probably way over your head and probably seems near impossible. Don't worry. The more you work through it, honestly, the easier and easier it gets. And the more this stuff becomes second nature. If you've never worked with Flopzilla before, this is probably untenable, but I appreciate you sticking it out. And trust me, this is the stuff that helps overall and helps build that solid framework to use in real time. That way you're not just guessing and saying, I don't know, maybe you'll fire Jack 10. Does the spade matter? I don't know. Right? Like, this is the stuff that helps you actually make that discernment in real time, at least with a higher degree of confidence. So at this point, we still need to fire a lot of bluffs. Now, I'm going to consider weak pair here, because weak pairs are typically going to be made, with a 6, with a 3, and I think a lot of those, I'm not really betting them for value, but they have a lot of potential. So I'm going to fire my weak pairs, and again, we need to get this number down here up to 70. I'm going to fire my nut flush draws, second nut flush draws, third nut flush draws, open ended straight draws, got shots. All right, not all of them. And what else? Weak flush draws? Well, weak flush draws, that gets me right up to 70. And let's just hover over it and see if those should get preference. So weak flush draws, well, that has ace 4 with the 4 of spades. Or should I do gut shots? Well, there's definitely going to be some overlap in those, right? In terms of the Jack 10s, the Queen Jacks, we see all those over on the left. I think I'm comfortable with this. I think the weak flush draws are fine. Again, you could prioritize one or the other. They're both going to be fairly similar in terms of combo count. But for the moment, I'm going to lock in. I'm comfortable with this. And again, I go check. Did Jack 10, Jack of Hearts, 10 of Spades fit the bill here? And we hover in. Where are we at? We are in weak flush draws. It's very close to the bottom of the range, but the hand really doesn't have much showdown value. The hand has some equity. The hand is definitely valuable enough if I can get my opponent to fold 9x. So yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable here firing it. And then it also opens it up for river potential for turning my hand into a bluff that, again, really probably doesn't have much, if any, showdown value. And then finally, ace of clubs on the river. Should we fire this again? So again, if we're looking at our frequencies, this river should be 70%. And because we should have 2 value to 1 bluff, we should have about 50, give or take, on the value spectrum in terms of percentage here. And then the rest of it should be air made up however the heck we can. But here's the issue. You notice we don't have a tremendous amount of value, right? If we include all top pair as value here, and that's certainly questionable because some of this is ace deuce. Are we really firing ace deuce for value on the river? I mean, I know I do in a lot of situations, but I don't think the average person does. This might change for you. You might say, okay, I only consider 2 pair plus to be value in this spot based upon who my opponent is and how I think they're going to continue. Keep that conversation in mind. Keep that question in the back of your head for the moment. Work with me here. So if the only way that I can make value here is top pair plus, that gets me to 36, then I need to have about 16, 17% nonsense. And what are my choices here? I can turn middle pair into a bluff. Okay, I could do that a bunch of different ways. I could turn weak pairs into bluffs, and that would be like the 5-6 that we talked about earlier. Or we could take no made hand like this, Jack high, and turn it into a bluff. Now, the thing with Jack 10, the thing that I really like with Jack 10 is a couple different things. Let me share the screen so y'all can see the hand again. And let's do entire screen, screen 1. I'll pop back in 1 second. The thing I really like about Jack 10 is that we block out ace jack. We block out ace 10. We block out some spade combinations. We have a hand that has 0 showdown value. Well, I shouldn't say 0. Jack 10 does a little bit better than 7-8 because Jack 10 can beat 7-8. Jack 10 can beat, 7-8. That's really about it, right? So there's not much showdown value. But if I have to like rank hands, I'd prefer to turn 8-7 into a bluff, especially if I had a spade in it. That could favor me a little bit. But ultimately, this doesn't really have any showdown value. So when it comes to building the rest of my range, I just say, okay, which hands fit the bill? And this one has some blocker potential. This one is kind of good in terms of it blocks out some ace jack. He could block out some king jack that maybe he could get sticky with. Ultimately, this is a hand type that I don't mind turning into a bluff because we need to fire some bluffs on the river. Now, here's the exception. Let's say Kelly is an absolute fish. Right? Any hand that Kelly got to the river with, any pair, probably going to call down. Let's just say that's who she is. That's how she's likely to play. Well, what's the point of firing? Right? There's no fold equity. So why do we turn our hand into a bluff? Right? We need to understand what a default strategy looks like. And we understand the firing Jack 10 is just fine because we need to fire some bluffs and it's kind of a preferred combo to turn into a bluff. Okay, all good. But we still need to use our poker brain. If Kelly won't ever fold, well, what's the point of firing it? On the flip side, let's say Kelly is pretty nitty on rivers and is almost certainly going to fold king queen, king jack, king 10, might even fold the ace of spades if we bet big, right? We are betting 300 into 3 1/4. If she's going to fold everything other than 2 pair plus, well, why not bluff more? Sure, Jack 10 is an easy option, but we could also turn 6x into a bluff. We could also turn 9x into a bluff. We could also turn lots of different things like the Queen 10 and the 7-8 and the 56 and all that kind of stuff into bluffs, right? So we still use our poker brain. We still use poker logic. What we just did with Flopzilla was came up with a really solid overall strategy and overall range and chose combinations that made a lot of sense. And then we say, okay, I have my back pocket strategy. I have a back pocket range here. I have my back pocket frequencies here. Now, who's my opponent? And should I use my back pocket or should I use preferably something that's going to actually optimize against that person specifically? If you have the information, use it. If you don't, now you have the starting point. And here's the thing. A lot of people aren't going to bluff this. A lot of people will just say, well, I double barreled, that failed, and they're just not going to fire the river. And the whole point of this example is not to say, hey, you should fire every single river if it comes over card. That's not the point either. The point is what goes into range construction, understanding value versus bluffs, understanding what that looks like on a street-by-street basis, and think about the turn, right? Going back a street, how many people are really firing this turn often enough? Most people, honestly, they're not firing thirds, they're not firing weaks, they're not firing open-ended straight draws, they're not firing the weak pair, they're treating middle pair as showdown value, they're treating some of the top pairs as showdown value, so let's knock that down in half. And they're what? Firing about a third of the time. That's what most players that you play against are doing. Heck, that might be what you were doing yesterday. So I want you to be really, really concerned about this as you're going through and making these decisions. Actually, even worse, maybe I got to remove some of that middle pair. So again, this gives you a starting point. Most players don't have this, not even close. And now you do have a starting point, and this is going to be really, really important. Now, again, like I said, these are going to be two very, very different examples because there's this one where we started from the cutoff and we had a very, very wide range. In the final example, we're going to start from early position and we're going to have a much tighter range and see how that factors in. So keep that in mind. So, all right, I'll open it for 2 seconds if y'all have any questions. Eugene says, thanks. I don't even know what I did, Eugene, but you are super welcome. Good. Ed says, never barrel a station. 100% correct. Like I said, chat is delayed by about 30 seconds, so I'll give you all a moment. If y'all have any questions, I'll answer one or two real quick. So Real Repo says, for this analysis, we will be called at a certain frequency. No, that's how we deviate from this. is when we have an idea on how often they're going to continue, what frequency our opponent continues at. This is just default building a strategy, right? And again, you notice that all the bet sizes were around pot size, which is why we kept those ratios we originally talked about. Again, if you were going to start going smaller, well, the value to bluff ratio is going to change. So it's not at all really about our opponent. It's about building a default range that makes sense given the situation, given the board, given the run out, given position, right? It's making decisions in a smart way. But notice we really didn't talk about our opponent until we started talking about deviating from this as the starting point. Don says, I think Jonathan Little does a similar range analysis street by street. That's awesome. I mean, this is complicated stuff. Don't get me wrong. And if you've never done this before, this is going to be a little tricky. Honestly, the first couple times you do this, it'll probably take you an hour or two to like really crack through a hand like this. A lot of people that have worked through my workbook, they're like, okay, did this, wasn't expecting it to take this long, but holy crap, the light bulbs that went off. And again, like you notice what we're doing when we're going through the Flopzilla, right? We're thinking, how do my opponents do this? Is this how most of my opponents would value top pair? Is this where my opponents would draw a line in terms of what they deem as value versus not value? These kind of questions are invaluable and they're challenging, particularly if you don't have much experience, right? If you're newer to the game, it's going to be really tough to answer some of these questions, but it's going to be really, really valuable to try. And if you have no experience or very little, then just do it based upon yourself and say, okay, like how would I play here? How would I think about value here? Trust me, that's like an invaluable exercise that most players don't do enough. Mike says jacks, 3 callers. Okay, like I don't want to get into like specific hand histories that aren't this one, but okay, Mike, save that question for the end. That's actually, it's a really good one, but it definitely convolutes from where we are right now. But I do want to answer that. Theo says, so was the answer any one of the 3? Any of the 3 play. I prefer the Jack 10 one. 8-7 is also really good too. In fact, I ran this through a solver earlier and Jack 10 was like literally the cusp hand as far as I explored it. Ben said, how did you get to the 70% on the turn in Flopzilla? I just kept adding hands until I got it. So remember, we had a whole bunch of these, weak flush draws. I think we had open-ended straight draws. We had some of this stuff. I forget what the middle pair was. And what, weak pair? Something like that. Maybe gut shots. I can't remember. Something to that extent. Got us up to 70. Good. Eugene said workbook was awesome. Excellent. Yeah. It's super valuable working through it. I mean, it's time intensive, but it's worth every rep that you put into it for sure. All right, let's get back to it. So I think we're calling it good there. Let's get into the next example and start having a little bit of fun and see what we're going to do. So this one's called Bluffing the Pair. And as I'm sure you can guess, we're going to consider the value of turning a pair into a bluff raise. So we're playing 1-2. Alex opens from early position. Hero decides to call on the button. If you call or don't call with ace-5 suited right now, that's okay. That's not the point. Again, we're just going to see if ace-5 really fits the bill, and I'll show you the process. And then you can say, okay, well, here's my range, and then you go explore your range after this. So flop is $23. Alex c-bets for 15. Hero decides to call, and we'll talk again of whether that's good or bad. On the turn, Alex fires for 35 into 53, and Hero raises to 150 total. So let's do a poll real quick, and let's fire it up. Give you guys a moment. So essentially the poll is just, what do you think about this raise? Do you think it looks good? Do you think it looks spewy and you would never make this raise? Or do you have no real idea what to think of this? And this is probably something you don't do as a default, but you've never really thought about turning this kind of pair into a bluff before. So be honest, no right or wrong answer. I take that back. There is a right answer, but I want you to be honest. All right, give you guys another, 5-10 seconds. By the way, I love how energetic and awesomely involved you guys are today. This is great. This makes it so much more fun when y'all are involved in this kind of stuff. And by the way, if y'all have feedback after this, especially after you've watched the replay, given it a little bit of time to digest, and, if you like these polls in between, if you like the kind of stuff we're doing here, please let me know. I am all ears on that kind of feedback. Good and bad, of course. All right, so answers, what you guys said? You guys said 30% of y'all said you like it, 41% said it looks spewy, and 29% were very, very honest and said, I have no idea what to think of this raise. So I really, really appreciate that, guys. I think you guys are spot on here in terms of this is a very typical breakdown. Most people don't like it because most people don't like turning pairs into bluffs. Most people don't know what to do. Well, not most, but a lot of people don't know what to do. And some people are pretty darn confident in this kind of play. This is a very typical breakdown, so this is not too shocking. So as always, the best way to say, is this good or bad, is to prove it. So let's pull out Flopzilla and get to work. So let's do a call 2-bet range. And again, I am definitely going to call with this kind of hand pre-flop, but I know not everybody does. How wide? How wide? Let's say 22%. So on the button with stack depth, again, we're playing 1-2, so there's some pretty deep stacks here. I'm going to be getting involved a pretty large chunk of the time. And I think this is probably pretty fair. You know, we have ultimate position. We only have 2 players left. Most players in live don't squeeze very often, so I'm going to use my position a lot of the time here. So yes, ace-5 is most certainly included in here. In one moment, I will make this bigger, so bear with me for a second. 8-5. Good. All right, so let me stop sharing. Start sharing. Flopzilla, share. All right. If y'all could say yes in one moment, just to let me know that you just see Flopzilla. One sec, I'm going to take my hoodie off. It's getting hot in here. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. All right, so let's start firing through this thing and rock and roll. So we already talked a little bit about, again, what are the basic rules, right? Let's see. Basic rules are, if we bet, we should usually bet again on the next street. Okay, nice and easy. Come on now. Sorry, just trying to reset all these filters. I wish there was a global reset button for Flopzilla. Chances are there is, and I'm just a dumb and don't know where it is, but that would be really, really nice sometimes. All right, so what was I saying? Oh yeah, rule 1, if you bet, you should usually bet again on the next street. Well, that doesn't really apply here, at least in terms of the flop, because we just called the c-bet, but rule 2 does. If we call on one round, we should usually continue again on the next. So I'm going to say that I should be continuing on the flop around 70% of the time, and honestly, it's going to be a little bit higher than that. And this is a little bit easier, right? Because when it comes to calling, well, I'm not going to call a lot of junk. I'm going to call stuff that makes sense. I'm going to raise some stuff, but ultimately I'm going to be continuing with stuff that makes sense. Not like, I don't know, what's a really stupid hand here? Like queen deuce of spades. Like that would be a really, really rough continue on 10-8-5 with a flush draw. That's not for the queen deuce. So we have to use our brain a little bit, but honestly, I'm going to be continuing probably somewhere between 70 and 85% of the time, and we'll go forward from there. So let's see what we can do in this situation. And again, I'm not really worried about ratio in this spot unless I'm raising, and we're talking about that on the turn. So we're up to 27%, which includes pocket pairs below top pair. Obviously not going to fold pocket nines here, never folding top pair, never folding sets. And honestly, I'm just going to kind of tack down the list. And when I'm continuing by calling, this is typically what I do when I'm studying in Flopzilla. It's just keep ticking them in until I get up to where I get to. So weak pairs, I'm not folding a pair. Good luck with that. I'm not folding a flush draw, not folding open a straight draw, not folding a gut shot. And I'm almost up to 70%. So what else am I going to do? Well, overcards. Well, let's do 2-card backdoor flush draws first. That already gets me up to 70. This includes all of this stuff down here, so that's good. And essentially at this point, I just have to decide, like, am I going to favor overcards? Am I going to favor ace high? Or am I going to favor no made hand? Now, let's just favor overcards. See where that gets us? That gets us up to 89. That's fine. Honestly, dynamic boards favor the in-position player. So unless I think this dude's really, really nitty for whatever reason on his c-bet, and again, if you have the information, you can deviate. But if you don't, I'm going to utilize stack depth. I'm going to utilize position. I'm going to utilize future pressure. And I'm going to probably continue on this board a lot of the time. So again, that puts me right here. I'm going to continue on the flop about 90% of the time. Now the turn is the 6 spades. Okay. Now, facing a bet, we know we need to be continuing a pretty large chunk of the time, right? Usually about 70%. And there's a lot of things that we can reasonably continue with. So if we continue with top pair or better, probably hands I'm always going to be continuing with, that's already up to a 33%. Okay, probably going to be continuing with middle pairs. Those have outs, and that could be good sometimes when he's barreling like ace king high and ace queen and diamonds and all that kind of stuff. And what else? Weak pair? Yeah, weak pair is pretty great. But okay, let's pause for a moment. Remember in the actual hand, we raised. Well, that's a little different. So if we're going to raise, let's break back to the hand itself. Sorry, I know I keep bouncing back and forth, but I know it's really difficult to see Flopzilla unless I do exactly this kind of thing. Okay, so remember in the hand, we decided to raise on the turn. So we're trying to discern if this was any good. Well, let's go back to our ratios, right? So we already know we need to continue on the turn a large chunk of the time, and continuing just means a combination of calls and raises. So, but just for the record, the more you raise, the less you actually need to call. But I digress. Well, the less you need to continue overall, and that includes calling. So the question here is, does this make a lot of sense? Well, we know that the ratio on the turn should be one value for one bluff. So if I'm developing this, I'm going to start by saying, okay, how many value hands would I raise here? And then let's come up with an appropriate number of bluffs. And again, this really probably isn't really ever value, right? When you raise here and get action, I mean, you beat ace king of diamonds, ace queen of diamonds, king queen of diamonds, and that's probably about it, right? There's not like a ton else that you really crush. So most of the time when you get action, your hand is way, way, way behind. You have some equity, sure, but ultimately I'm not looking at ace five as a value raise here. So if we go back here, let's start with that in mind instead. Let's say that we are going to raise two pair or better, right? So that's two pair, that's sets, and that's straights. And that's where we're going to end up raising in this spot. Well, that's 22 combinations of hands, which means I need to find 22 combinations of air in order to make sure that I have the perfect one-to-one ratio. Okay, and again, we're not talking about deviation. We're not talking about information on Alex. We're just talking about what does a good range look like here and how do we build that going forward. So I asked myself, okay, could top pair be considered value here? And probably not. Maybe you could make an argument for ace 10 being value, but most people honestly are just going to treat this a little bit more as kind of the value, showdown value part of their range, and they don't include it in their raising range. I digress on whether that's good or bad. I'm just saying what most people do. So we're going to start with 22 and start trying to figure out which combinations work best. Now, a lot of people will just say, you know what, I'm going to raise my flush draws, which is actually 22 combos. And they're going to say, you know what, I'm perfect. I'm one-to-one right now. I have 22 air hands and I have 22 value hands and I'm good. Me personally, I don't love raising all of those. These are very, very different kinds of flush draws, right? You have everything from ace high, which may have some inherent showdown value, and you're also blocking out kind of flush draw hands that he could have, which reasonably means you might push a little more density into top pair plus for him. So maybe that's not going to be the best. Maybe I call that and utilize my river range and go from there. And you could make the same argument with a whole bunch of these flush draws. So I'm not really in love with that because a lot of these either have some sort of pair, some sort of showdown value attached, or really aren't worth turning into a raise because if you get mashed on, you're not super thrilled with it and you kind of just blew up all the equity that it had. So I'm not going to use flush draws for that. Now I could use gut shots, right? And especially some of the weaker ones. So maybe pocket fours works really well. Maybe I could turn like 8-9 into it. So again, you notice that we have a lot of opportunities, but what I'm really focused on here is using hands that don't have much showdown value. And that probably seems a little contradictory at first, right? Because a lot of people will look at this and say, well, James, you have a pair. That's showdown value, my man. And I'll say to you, not really, because if you call 35 and face a $100 bet on the river, are you thrilled with that? Because if you're not, and you're probably not going to ever call that, then you don't have showdown value because showdown value exists when you get to showdown. And if you're not going to get to showdown, then you don't have showdown value. And that's why I'm totally okay turning this hand into a bluff rather than just saying, LOL, I has pair, I has showdown value. No, that's not really how it works. It's not like that. Just because most people treat it like that doesn't mean that it actually is. So you could turn middle pair into a bluff. You could turn weak pairs like this into a bluff, or you could take some junky hands, maybe like, I don't know, Queen Jack. Like Queen Jack is a really, really good example of a possible hand to raise here. And then Queen Jack is pretty cool because you block out pocket queens, you block out pocket jacks, you have some backup equity with your gut shot. That's a good possibility. You could also say the same thing for ace five, right? Ace five, you block out bottom set, which is a hand that he would definitely be giving a lot of action in a big pot with. You block out pocket aces, you block out ace 10. You have some really great things going for you. So ace five is one of these hands that I'm totally comfortable turning into a bluff. Now, the thing is I got to be careful about not adding too many of these and getting to the point where my raising range here is like 3 bluffs for every 1 value. It's very easy to do that. So don't get carried away. Just choose the ones that make the most amount of sense. I think raising things like ace five, king five suited, if you had anything like that, maybe a king eight, could make some sense. Those kind of hands can do some damage when it comes to turning them into a bluff, rather than just always saying, well, it's a pair, so I'm going to call it down to the river and then make a decision when I face a river bet, when you could have leaned on this. And also remember, if he does decide to call this, well, you're pretty much left with a potter back on the river. And you can decide, do I think there's any fold equity in there? And if so, you can choose, okay, ace five can be another hand to just barrel through and mash the river. Or if I get called, I think there's no fold equity, in which case, again, why would I bluff all that much in that situation? So you notice this balance between trying to create a strategy that is back pocket, that is good frequencies, that is good ratios. And then if I have information, how do I want to contort those things to optimize it to my opponent, to my situation, and exactly what's going on here? Is all that making sense? I know at first glance it seems a little weird. Most people are not comfortable turning pairs into bluffs like we already talked about. But again, this has some really great bluffing potential, and even more so because you can represent, in his mind, probably a lot of different hands, right? We already noticed when we went back to Flopzilla, like, we can have straights, we can have sets, we can have these kind of hands, and that's a really, really good thing for us to use. Right? And even more so if we were wider preflop, right? If we could have 7-4 and 8-5 and 9-6 and that kind of stuff, great. It's even more on the power side of the spectrum. And then we can just throw in some extra bluff combos and we're good from there. And some of you may say, well, James, like, Alex is barreling on like a really bad card for him. Clearly, he should know that we picked up decent range equity here, and thus he's definitely not going to be barreling at a proper frequency. And I'm just going to say BS, right? The average person does not adjust appropriately when a quote-unquote bad card rolls off for them. They just have no idea what that means, yet alone how to adjust, even if they knew that the 6 wasn't a great card for them. So, again, you have to know your opponent, but know that most opponents do not adjust appropriately and are going to make a lot of mistakes in terms of betting at incorrect frequencies on cards that they shouldn't, which allows you to, again, start turning some other hands into bluffs that you wouldn't necessarily have done if you thought Alex was going to shave his betting range here down to like 25% and have it be very, very value injected. So hopefully that's making sense. Again, ace five here, I am very happy turning this into a bluff rather than just default calling it down like most people do. And just in general, some players would just call here because LOL pair. Other people are just going to fold here because, well, it's not strong enough pair. So both of those things are inherently wrong, right? You can't just always mash every single pair through and never think about showdown value. And you can't just always fold everything that's non-nut without a legitimate reason to do so. You have to make solid decisions with solid rationale. And just in general, it takes a crowbar to get me to fold a pair in general, but I'm doing so because I'm trying to actualize my equity all the way through. I'm trying to find future streets where I think my opponents are going to make bigger errors that I can take advantage of. So again, it's done with poker rationale. There's no ego involved in it. There's nothing other than what's the math, what's my opponent, how do I shape my ranges and my frequencies, what's the best line, pull trigger, go from there. Is that all making sense, guys? Bum, bum, bum. Perfect. I'm going to check comments for a moment. Gabriel says, makes sense to me when the language is simpler. I'm hoping this is simple language. I definitely am okay with being told, hey, this is a little too advanced. I'd always rather give you guys the really, really good stuff. And I don't want to sugarcoat anything. I want to make it so it's understandable, but I don't want to go like, I don't know. This isn't baby steps. I know that this is tough stuff. For y'all that are sticking through this, like, high five, seriously. James, so here we took 150 big blind stack and used 80 of that on this hand. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have to risk big blinds. Al says, gold from me. Thanks. You are very welcome. Submit. One thing that's really, really important is we have to be comfortable risking money when we don't have a lock, right? And clearly in this hand, we don't have a lock in terms of having a netish super strong hand, and we don't have a lock in terms of having perfect information on Alex, right? If we had either of those things, sure, poker is really, really easy. But we rarely have those things. And that's why we have to do this kind of work. So that way, when we don't have the perfect info, we have a starting point. We have a really, really good way of creating a strategy rather than just totally guessing, which is what most people end up doing. And submit, we are very deep in this hand. And you don't have to be 300 big blinds. Okay, yeah, that's a fair point. You don't have to be super, super deep in order to do this. Right, there are plenty of times where maybe you guys are only 150 big blinds deep, and this kind of thing can still happen. Or if you're playing online, right? Online is going to be very different because remember, this is a live hand, so Alex opened to 5 big blinds. If you're playing online and your opponent opened to 2.5 big blinds, you both started with 100 big blind depth, you can still have this kind of maneuverability and flexibility. Okay, so it's really based upon, the stack depth and the super depth of the SPR. That's going to really, really help here. Excellent. Tom says, could we have the same effect with a $105 raise? I don't think so. I mean, 150 is a perfect pot sizer, or not perfect, but very, very close to it. And just in general, I mean, do what you need to do. If you think 105 gets the job done, heck yeah, right? And it gives you even more flexibility on the river. Or if you think it takes 150 in order to really convince jacks to go away or 10x to go away, whatever it be, choose the size that's best for it. Again, I worked all these things based upon pretty much pot sizers because that's where the ratios come through. If you can get it away at a smaller price and keep a similar ratio, cool, rock and roll. Joan, here's the honest truth. You get that courage. So Joan says, I wish I had more courage. Honestly, you get the courage by doing exactly this kind of work. This is how you really start to develop that skill set and saying, okay, I know this is good. I've run the math before. I'm going to pull trigger. The issue is people don't run this stuff off table and thus in real time are just guessing. And when you're in real time, you have those natural stressors going on. Your adrenaline's pumping a little bit. Your natural lizard brain is going to kick in. And most people's natural lizard brain is very, very risk averse, very, very self-protected and self-preservative. And that's normal. That's literally what our brains are like baseline designed to do. So you have to work through it to develop the confidence and the knowledge that, okay, this is definitely going to be good. And now I'm going to pull trigger. If you don't do that, you're always going to revert back to risk aversion. And, you can beat smaller games being just a little bit less risk averse than other players. But if you seriously want to move up and start bashing around at 5-10, 10 quarter, and I'm talking live for those stakes, or even like 100 no limit, 200 no limit, 400 no limit online, you have to just be able to pull triggers. And you only pull the trigger because you know it's good. And you only know it's good because you've done this kind of work. It kind of starts really feeding itself. And at some point, you really start to enjoy this work. I mean, it takes me a lot of time to do like the hardcore analysis that we're doing right now. Like I'll do like expanded versions of this for multiple different preflop ranges and on multiple different turn cards. And it might take me a few hours. But man, what you learn from a few hours of exploration and this kind of stuff is just invaluable. All right, guys. So let's rock and roll. Let's move on to the next one. F Ace King. Okay, I know Ace King, everyone's super favorite hand because it always friggin' misses. Then no one knows what the heck to do with it. So here's the basic situation. Hero opens from early position to 20, again playing 2-5. Nate calls on the button. Hero decides to c-bet the flop. Nate calls. Turn is a jack, and Hero fires 100 into 117. So again, is this good? Is this bad? Let's fire up a quick poll real quick and see what y'all think. So do that, publish that. Excellent. So take a couple of seconds, run the poll. I don't know, 15 seconds, give or take. I know it takes y'all a couple of seconds to see the poll in the chat anyway. Got a couple of yeses. There they go. All right. Give you guys just a couple more seconds. You guys have been great. This is so much fun. Thank you guys so much. This is enjoyable. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. End that poll. All right, so what we say? 28% of y'all said no, you do not like the bet here. 61 said yes, and 12 said I like the bet, but I would only bet 60 instead of 100. Oh man, oh man, oh man. All right, so first and foremost, let's talk about this. 28% of y'all said you wouldn't fire here. If you're not firing this, well, we're do the Flopzilla. We'll see what you think after that. But I would definitely be very, very happy firing this, or at least considering it. And the ones that you said you would bet smaller, the thing you have to consider is that if you bet smaller, say 60, does that still get the job done? And also remember, that's going to change your ratios because you're giving Nate far different pot odds. And getting Nate to fold some equity, some extra equity, is great, right? Because the more he folds now, the less you have to see showdowns, the less he's seeing his and actualizing his equity, and those can all be very, very beneficial things. So let's fire out of here and see if this is any good. So let's fire this back up. Let's clear it all out and clear that out. So I mentioned earlier that we had a very, very wide range in that other hand, right? The one where we open from the cutoff. Here we open from early position. And I don't know, some of y'all are going to differ a little bit here, but I'm probably opening about, you know what? I don't even think that's 100% fair. I'm probably a little bit closer to 10%. Probably throwing topside suited connectors because that's what I do. King Jack suited because that's a fun hand. So let's just split the difference. We're going to say 12.5%. And again, if you open a different range of hands and you want to take the time to explore this hand later, I definitely suggest you do. Hands like this can be extremely valuable in terms of exploring them because this is a pretty mundane spot, right? You have ace king, you raise preflop because duh. You c-bet the flop because, well, most people do, and you miss, and you continue missing. So this is not like a rare situation. Exploring very common spots like this can be invaluable to your growth. So definitely make sure to spend the time with them. So here, what do we got? We got a queen seven, was it 4 of hearts? Good. So let's see if we like this c-bet here. So we already know we're going to c-bet this, about 70% of the time. We already know those numbers. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Get back into percentage mode. And what do we got in terms of value? See, top pair or better, about a third. Okay, it's a little bit high. You can probably shave some of this stuff off. I'm going to take some of my sets. I'm going to check queens. Fine. What else? Overpairs? I don't know. Let's check aces. So I don't want to get into this too much, but there is a lot of value in thinking about who my opponent is, and is it more important for me to protect my betting range or more important for me to protect my checking range? And when you're playing against tougher opponents, particularly out of position, it's very important to consider if you check, are you always going to check fold? Are you always going to check call with exactly pocket eights and pocket tens because you hate life? Or can you occasionally have some stronger stuff, either to check raise or to check continue and have an actual range of hands that can handle multiple fires from Nate going into future streets? So always ask yourself that question. I know that's a little above and beyond, and we're not going to like hardcore explore that rabbit hole or anything, but it's always a starting point for me. And sometimes, especially when I'm a little high in the value spectrum, right, it's just too many combos. Here, this shaves us down to 26 after removing those. Yeah, I can be totally okay with that. You could even probably shave out a little bit top pair. Maybe you get rid of queen jack. Perfect. And we're down here to, 25. Okay, that's fine. So we got our value stuff kind of hammered out. And then the rest is just what are we going to favor in terms of bluffs? Well, pretty much everything is a little bit of weak pair with 8-7, whatever. We got our flush draws, cool. And it's a really tough board to pick up a lot of other stuff. I mean, we can have 2 card backdoor flush draws, but that only gets us up to 35. We need this up to 70. So let's just start bashing stuff in here. Let's do some overcards. Okay, that includes our ace king. Awesome, still only 45. Let's include some other ace highs. It's not a ton of them. Let's include some weak pairs. Those aren't going to have a tremendous amount of showdown value by the time you get there. And there we go. We're at 71%. Lock that in. Good to go. Jack of diamonds on the turn. So again, we need to be probably about 70% here, and we should have, again, 1-to-1, one value for every one bluff. So this should be 35% when we get to being done with our value, and then the rest of it will be bluffy kind of hands. So I think over pairs and top pairs can still be on the value spectrum. That gets us to 37. Okay, cool. Now we just have to start firing in air. So what do we want to favor here? Middle pair? Do we want to turn that into showdown value, or do we want to turn that into a bluff? Let's start by turning that into a showdown value hand, and we'll go from there and see if we need to expand it to include that. What about weak pairs? A lot of that doesn't have a tremendous amount of showdown value, so let's include it. And then what's the rest of it? Flush draws, open-ended straight draws, gut shots. Well, all the gut shots mean we're going to include ace king. So what are we going to do from there? So now the question is, do we want to include all weak pairs, or do we want to favor ace king, right? Because if we include weak pairs to just be 8-7 and get rid of all of these, and mind you, those don't have much showdown value, but again, it's which way do we want to favor, and then put all gut shots in. Okay, well, we're pretty darn close here. Then we go back to weak pair, add in what, one or two more. Doesn't really matter, actually. Let's favor sixes, and here we are. So we're pretty much right at 70, right in line. And again, the question is, did the hand we had, should that have been in the range? It is included in gut shots, and as such, here we go. Okay, so yes, I think this should be a bet. And again, this isn't just because we picked up equity. This isn't just because the turn card is a royal card. This isn't anything like that. Don't look for hard and fast rules in terms of the texture, the position, anything like that. Look at this from how do we build ranges, looking at the frequency, looking at the ratio, and then making decisions and discernments from there. Not, okay, it's a queen high board and I'm going to remember how to play every queen high board, or I'm going to always remember how to play if the turn card is the second royal card. Don't get caught up in that minutia, because that's the wrong variable stuff to get focused on. Get focused on the frequencies and the ratios. Okay. All right, guys. So that is the end of the hands. I am going to, let's just wide open this up to Q&A. I think that'll probably be the best. Now, keep in mind here, there's a lot of stuff we covered already, right? And I know at first, especially if you're newer, this is overwhelming. Okay, I totally get it. So let's use this time to try to fill in any gaps that y'all have. I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to start typing stuff into chat. No hand histories, please. Whoever asked that great question about jacks earlier, please ask it again, and I will try my best to make sure that I see it again. And that's the only hand history I'm going to talk about, just because it brings up a broader point that I want to talk through. So let's talk about that. And I'll give you guys a minute. Again, type in your questions in chat. I'll be checking there in a moment. I do have a bunch of ones that people already sent in through the questionnaire form earlier over the last couple of days. So we're going to go through some of those too, and then some of y'all's. And one other thing, remember, after this, we do still have that free downloadable. So definitely make sure to stick around. Even if you don't have a question, I suggest asking them if you have them, but stick around because we are going to get to that free download as well. Excellent. I'll give you all a moment. And like I said, I will be checking chat as we go through. Yeah, Darren said jacks on a flop of ace queen 4. I think it was a multi-way situation. I think that's why I thought it was interesting. All right, so while y'all are typing in questions, I'm going to start going through some of the ones that people already asked during the week. So Mr. Hustle says, should we go with numbers or gut instinct when it comes to bluffing? Okay, as we talked about throughout this webinar, numbers are crucial. Now, what is gut instinct? Well, for a lot of people, it's just garbage, right? It's just their lizard brain telling them to do something. And I know I'm using that term a little cartoonishly, but essentially, your lizard brain is just your default mode. Is super, super primitive, super, super protective. And most people's gut instinct is not well refined based upon experience. It's just fear. It's ego. It's your brain playing protective tricks on you. Numbers are real. Okay, we talked through numbers today. I showed you what legitimate ranges looked like through the lens of numbers. Okay, that stuff is real and legitimate, and there's no ego in it, and there's no fear in it, and there's no brain playing tricks on you nonsense. So when it comes to bluffing, numbers rule. Now again, if you have information is not a gut instinct, by the way. Information is really just numbers. It's information that you have that bends you to a frequency in your opponent. And we already talked about using that information when you have it to deviate from the back pocket strategy. So numbers, 100%, no questions asked. Ed says, how do you get over the fear of getting stacked in a tournament when you know you quote unquote need to bluff? Kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier. I think Joan was the one that asked it. It's one of those, you get over the fear by going through the work and diving down the rabbit holes off session. So that way in real time, you just know what has to be done. Okay. You know you need to bluff some percentage of the time. You also know that your bluffs are going to fail some percentage of the time. And they could fail because the bluff was garbage. They could fail because it's baked into the equation. Your opponent's going to continue sometimes. It could fail for a number of different reasons. So study as best you can off table, make the best decisions you can during sessions, and review those situations after. And the more you do that, the more you're going to get over the fear. Because getting stacked is part of the game. A lot of players approach this game thinking, oh, I'm never going to lose a pot. I'm just going to play really, really tight, really protective, wait for big hands, and I'll never really lose a pot. That's nonsense. That's absolute garbage. And even if it were okay, it's most certainly not optimal. So we need to get over the fear of losing a stack. We need to get over the fear of making a mistake. We need to get over the fear of having a bluff, quote unquote, fail. It's baked into the equation. It's going to happen some percentage of the time. But the more you work through the numbers, the more you know your stuff was good, the more you review it later and say, yep, this was okay, or nope, this was garbage, but I learned from it, and this is the mistake I'm not going to make again in the future. That's awesome. That's all we can really ask for. So again, you get over it by doing the work, hopping through it, making sure you study that stuff later. So online player, they didn't enter their name, but they did play online, says, what is the best strategy to use after you try a bluff and get caught? Okay, so again, kind of baked into the equation. That's going to happen sometimes. The big thing I focus on is, did the person who snapped off my bluff, what can I learn from the hand they showed up with? And how does that influence their ranges? And what information can I discern from that to make better decisions against them in the future? Right? So let's just say I run a bluff and I think, I'm using my back pocket strategy. I turn some hand into a bluff and it gets snapped off. And it turns out they called me with bottom pair. Okay. Well, I can learn from that. So rather than beating myself up because I lost a pot, or, oh, no, I lost 60 big blinds, so I'm an awful player. Like, screw that noise. Don't get in your head about that. Just say, okay, what did they call me down with? Well, if they're calling all the way down with bottom pair, the chances are they're pretty darn fishy. So in the future, I'm not going to fire that same bluff against them. It doesn't mean that I'm going to stop bluffing for the rest of the session. That's not what's going on. I'm not going into protective mode of, oh, no, now I'm playing from behind. I have to gamble in order to get back to even. Like, screw that noise. I'm going to play my game. I'm going to learn from what just happened and decide whether or not I should continue bluffing them in the future or not. And let's just maybe say it's not that situation. Let's say we run a bluff against a decent player and they snap it off with a reasonable hand and they see what I had. Okay, now they know that I'm bluffing, so how are they going to respond to that in the future? Well, they're probably going to snap me off a little bit lighter in the future, right? Because they know that I'm bluffing now. Cool. So what is one way I can strategically respond to that? I can bluff a little bit less against them. So you notice that I'm then deviating from the back pocket strategy because I have information on them and I'm making actual poker rational decisions in order to abuse them based upon the information that just happened. Okay, so whatever happens, whether your bluff works, whether your bluff fails, what information you get at showdown or they might get at showdown, definitely consider it and think about how you can adjust to that in the future. There's a lot of information beyond just, oh, my bluff failed, done. that's not the end of it. You have to think about what information was given in that hand. All right, so Michelle, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sorry if I'm not. I really suck at pronouncing names. Says, when our opponent uses GTO calling frequencies, does it make the case for deviating from GTO bluffing frequencies? Okay, so this is kind of that question that I asked earlier. Say you and I were going to play against each other, and I told you I'm going to play perfect 1% strategy. Okay, I'm going to use this as my frequency. I'm going to use this as my ratio. This is how I'm going to favor things. So you're betting against me, and you know that I'm going to be continuing at proper frequencies. First and foremost, nobody does. So let's just get that right out of the window right now. Nobody uses perfect GTO calling frequencies. Most people are so far off from it, couldn't tell you even remotely where it is. And as such, I don't worry about this in the slightest. Now, if I'm playing against really tough opponents, say I'm playing 10 quarter or 5-10 in a really tough lineup, yes, I'm definitely trying to make sure that I protect my own frequencies and don't make myself an easy target while also looking for ways to exploit my opponent. So if I find that I can deviate appropriately, so they are calling an appropriate frequency, and I say, okay, well, I can bluff a ton more because they're calling at this frequency. How am I going to do that if they're really continuing at 70%, by the way? Think about that for a little bit. You know, really like answer that question throughout the rest of the evening and ask yourself that again tomorrow. Like, if they are continuing at a pretty proper frequency, how the heck are you going to deviate? Are you going to bluff less? Are you going to bluff more? Right? Again, no one does it, but at least it's a fun thought experiment. But ultimately, you know, if you have information, cool. But, you know, the deviation from perfect GTO, no one's using it. And as such, I don't worry about it. I just worry about, is this person more likely to overfold here, more likely to underfold here, more likely to overraise here? Make decisions off of that, not what is GTO here, who is perfect GTO here, and how do I deviate accordingly? Because if you're both playing GTO, fine. But again, nobody is. So don't stress about this one. Chris says, is it ever plus EV to bluff all in at a live 1-2 table? Okay, really, really fair question. And I can answer this in two very, very simple steps. Might actually be one. First answer, yes. Done. Okay, yes, of course it can be. And here's exactly why. Step 2, have you ever shoved with the nuts and your opponent folded? Yeah. Right? You haven't gotten paid off on every single monster that you've ever hit. So inherently, people are folding something. And as such, you know, there's some folding at a minimum going on. And as such, yes, of course you can bluff because there's at minimum some folding happening. Now, I know the average thought process is LOL, it's live 1-2, whole bunch of fish, LOL, why ever bluff? First and foremost, that's nonsense. There are so many people at 1-2 tables that fold way too damn much, that maybe are very, very liberal when it comes to calling $40 bets, but really never continue if you fired 160. The same people that complain about no one ever folding in 1-2 games are usually the same people that never bet big enough. So of course no one's folding against it. You're not firing large enough. Now, if you can bluff all in and it's an overbet or it's near pot and you're like, yeah, my opponent's just never calling this often enough, for sure, fire away. In fact, I was in Vegas, not last week, the week prior, working with some students and playing at the same 1-2 table with them. And I do that for live coaching occasionally. And so we were playing, there were so many spots where I was to get away with like making $175 bluffs on rivers when the pot's like 90 and they just go away like every single time. So there's tons of spots to do it. And whenever you can ask yourself the question of, have I ever tried to get value here and my opponent's folded? That inherently says there is at least some folding going on, and thus you need to be looking for it rather than just making a blanket statement that no one ever folds at 1-2, which again is just utter nonsense. All right. Bum, bum, bum. All right, y'all, let's see some of the questions y'all have and make this visible. Lucy says, what's 1% strategy? What's it got to do with GTO? We will get into that in a moment. Bum, bum, bum. All right. Ba, ba, ba. All right, so let me get this one in here. This is from All right, so Jerry says, I might have misunderstood. What are frequencies? Is it the percentage of times you enter a pot, or is it to do with the percentage of hands within the range? So frequencies are both of those things, right? So when you enter a hand, like we talked about earlier, like the hands that we were going to play pre-flop, this is 12.5%. Right? So that's a frequency right there. But then also if we're continuing on this board and we're doing it with this range, this means that we're c-betting 94% of the time. Okay, so these are all frequencies. The major frequencies that we were focused on in this webinar is really thinking about 70%. Again, usually betting again on the next street if we had the chance to, usually continuing if we're the one facing bets. That's the frequency we're focused on. Again, usually bends out to about 70%. Of course, that's average, but if you use that as a starting point, it's going to be far better than nothing. Good question. All right. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, this is a good one too, because I think I'm understanding it correctly. Michael R. All right, so does the 70% apply on each street, each action? So if I have 70% continue on the flop and I'm holding a non-continue hand, then my opponent checks, am I back to 70% continue on the turn? Okay, so let's take a situation where I think I'm understanding this. So you raise pre-flop, your opponent calls, you do c-bet at appropriate 70% frequency, but you have a hand that's not worth c-betting into this spot. So you check, your opponent checks behind. So the question is kind of like, or maybe you check behind and they fire the turn, whichever. So you're firing, you checked this street, you're facing a bet on the next one. Do you have to continue and defend that at 70%? No, you do not. So the whole reason why this works is because you were betting at an appropriate frequency on the flop, okay? And let's just say you were, and that means inherently that the hand you probably checked was most likely not a bluff that was worthwhile, not a spot that was worthwhile for that hand. So inherently, you're not going to be able to continue often enough on the next one. The issue becomes is most people don't continue often enough on that flop, and then all of a sudden they end up in a spot where they have far too many hands and their frequencies get totally out of whack super quickly. So if you do end up having a non-continue hand, typically you're going to continue far less on that next street. So long as you were betting enough on the original street, you're fine. The issue comes in when you weren't firing the original street often enough. Good question. Bum, bum, bum. Okay. I think this is a good one too. And P-A-V-L. All right. Paul says, if villain is using, I'm assuming pot size, PO size, and we have stats and we see that he is barreling less than 70%, can we call any two cards? All right, so you have to make a decision on what this means. Okay, so if he's barreling infrequently, my question would be, why would I call with any two cards? Because if he's barreling that infrequently, chances are he's barreling on the stronger side of the spectrum. All right, let's just say that he was barreling 20% of the time on the turn, or triple barreling 20% of the time on the river. Well, I would assume that triple barrel or that double barrel, that really low frequency barrel is going to be very, very strong. So I definitely wouldn't call it with any two cards. That being said, on earlier streets, I would definitely be looking to float a tremendous amount more to take advantage of the fact that they're not betting enough and most likely not going to continue often enough on those future streets. So if I think this is the kind of guy, you see a lot of these guys online, right? They see the flop like a ton of the time, say 85, 90% of the time. And then all of a sudden on the turn, they're only betting the turn like 38% of the time. Like that's the dude you just float with impunity. So again, yes, you do this part, but you do this on an earlier street. You don't do that on the low barrel street. All right, so Walt, this was baked into the other question that I wanted to talk about, but I'll do it through this lens because it doesn't matter who asked it. Rather, it's a great question. So whoever originally asked it, thank you. Walt, thank you for reiterating. Do we adjust our frequencies if the pot is multi-way? Yes. Okay, so in the series I'm going to talk about in a moment, in 1%, there are good, bad, and non-events. And those events are going to change your frequency, right? So we talked about the default frequency being about 70%. Well, multi-way pots are typically a bad event, and as such, your frequencies are going to shift down. So it's not uncommon for a multi-way pot to appear and say you raise pre-flop, you get 3 callers. I'm not going to be c-betting 70% of the time in that situation. I just can't, right? I'm just not getting enough folds. It's not worthwhile enough. So inherently in those situations, my frequency is going to change massively and my ratio changes as well. That is just a common thing to happen when multi-way pots occur, particularly when the multi-way pot was not expected, which, for most of the time should probably be the case. Excellent. Theo says, all right, we'll do this last one. And it's actually something I can answer very, very simply, but I'll still answer it nonetheless. Thank you guys so much for all the awesome questions. So Theo asks, can Flopzilla predict your opponent's cards? No. Flopzilla doesn't do anything like that. Flopzilla is simply you have to input everything in. So it's one of those programs, like most poker programs, garbage in, garbage out. If you give Flopzilla crappy ranges and crappy assumptions, then inherently you're going to get garbage results, which is why it's really important to not only explore your opponent's ranges, but also your own ranges. And again, Flopzilla is great for that kind of stuff, and I definitely suggest picking it up if you don't already have it, but I digress. Very, very powerful, but no, it doesn't predict anything for you. It doesn't help you build their ranges. All the stuff that you saw in Flopzilla when I had it up, like these ranges over here on the left, these are all things that I've custom built myself. So it saves me a lot of time, but this doesn't come with Flopzilla. And even if it did, it wouldn't be it's a starting point. It's not perfect. It couldn't possibly know what your opponents have. And then finally, this is the last one that was already pre-given from Gav. Gav says, I know from a GTO perspective, you should have a range of bluffs based upon the number of value hands you have. Perfect. Good. We talked a lot about that tonight. What's a good way to get into the practice of implementing this into my game? Okay. So what we did today, going through hands, going through what 70% continuance would look like, going through which combinations work best, understanding what kind of bluffs are favored over other bluffs, what kind of polarization we want to use or not use. This is the only way to get better with it. And honestly, this is stuff that takes a lot of time, but it's the most beneficial thing you can possibly do. Once you have the basics of the game down, once you have a foundation of the game down, this is the stuff that's really going to make huge changes in your game, because you can't continue playing poker just trying to make big hands. And you can't just say, I'm randomly going to fire a bluff and have no idea what goes into firing that bluff. And that's where a lot of players get into trouble. And to be honest, it kind of leads perfectly into what I want to share with you guys today. For those of you, especially that haven't seen this, is you need a real strategy. And you need something that's going to help you have a legitimate strategy, that's going to help you move up. It's going to help you play against tougher opponents, help you protect yourself, and also exploit others more deeply. And you need something that's going to help you stay focused on frequencies, give you a starting point on frequencies, because you already know folding isn't a strategy, and just trying to hit big hands is not a strategy. And to that end, I'd like to introduce you guys to the 1%. So if you haven't seen this course already, it breaks down everything that you need. So what we did today in terms of breaking down hands, in terms of talking about the rules, talking about the frequencies, talking about the combos and the ratios, all of that is stuff that I break down in this course. It's an entire strategy that gives you what you need to not only protect yourself when you're playing against tougher opponents, but it gives you a starting point for understanding what your back pocket strategy is, how to set your frequencies the right way, how to prioritize the right combos, particularly when it comes to bluffing and semi-bluffing, and how to craft a strategy that others simply can't beat, right? We already talked about this. How are you going to beat someone who's playing like this? I mean, if you figure it out, I'd love to hear it. But ultimately, this is the back pocket strategy you need to have. When you have information, deviate. When you don't, you use this. Because this is the best bridge between GTO, game theory optimal, and overly whole card focused play. And I know a lot of people think the distinction is really between GTO and exploitative. But we already know, we need to know what GTO is. That way we know what exploiting, making that deviation actually looks like. But most people are so focused on their whole cards, trying to hit strong enough to continue, trying to hit monster hands, that they don't have a legitimate strategy. They don't understand what goes into continuing and how often and how wide we realistically need to be continuing. 1% is going to give you exactly that. And again, you always have that back pocket strategy to use, and I can't stress how important that is. So the entire course overall is 10 total in-depth videos, spans about 6.5 hours, and topics include, again, everything you need. And everything we talked about today is pretty much covered in even more depth. But essentially, we talk about frequency errors that everyone makes and things that you can stop doing like immediately, especially things on like ace high boards and bluff frequencies in certain spots, and really understanding when to change your overall frequency and deviate from 70%. Why? Again, that good, bad, not event concept I mentioned a little bit ago, how to properly combat when people raise you, especially when they 3-bet you pre-flop, how to branch your ranges, how to seed strength and protect your checks. We talked about that a little bit in passing, but we go into that in a lot more detail. And again, a lot more, including more examples with this kind of depth. And I do it at an even deeper level, taking you combo by combo through some of these examples. And here's the honest truth. I know it's about 6.5 hours long, but you could honestly digest this entire thing in a weekend and then refine it over time with practice. And that's one of the other things that's included in here, because I know that this stuff takes time. It takes practice in order to help it all sink in and make it usable in real time. And that's exactly why I included heaps of exercises to help you internalize this stuff in 3-bet spots and c-bet spots and barrel spots. And there's also answer keys included for everything. And to make things a little bit sweeter, because APT was awesome enough to kind of jump in here and help host this whole thing, I wanted to give you guys something really, really special. So the entire course, if you get the basic edition, is everything we just talked about. It's the full 10 video course. It's all the homework. It's the bonuses too. And it's $199. But if you use the code today, APT, you can take $100 off right this moment. So if you go over to, so there is also an upgradable version if you want more. It's called the Pure Edition. And if you get the Pure Edition, it comes with everything we just talked about. You also get the same $100 off if you use the APT code. You're going to get an additional series with even more example breakdowns and also 2 custom breakdowns of your hands. So I'll custom break those down and make sure you get exact feedback so that we can compare it to your own super tough hands. Especially if you got any of those that are kind of helping you lose a little sleep at night, this is going to help a ton. So if you go to splitsuit.com/APT, I'll leave a link over in the chat box as well. Publish that. Perfect. So if you go there, it'll take you right over here to the 1% course. Here you can see everything that's in it. And again, I already talked to you about what's included in here. There's the basic edition. Again, comes with the videos, the spreadsheet, and also the exercises and answer keys. And the Pure Edition comes with the other stuff that we talked about, including my Unfolding Poker audiobook, the extra bonus Q&A, and also another private webinar. Even more value, and again, both of them give you $100 off. So when you get here, choose the edition that's right for you, click I want this. Again, make sure to type in APT in the coupon code, and it will take $100 off immediately. This is not going to last forever, this code. In fact, I'm probably only going to run it for maybe a week tops. So if you're into it, get it now, get it quickly, lock it up. You will not regret it. Again, you can get it today, watch it over the weekend, start working through some of the exercises next week, and be well on your way getting what you need out of this course. Trust me, it's going to be a major, major game changer. All you have to do is use the code APT. And again, that's going to save you $100 off immediately. Just choose the version that's right for you. And again, APT works for the basic and the Pure version as well. I'll pause here for a second. If anyone has any questions about the product, or about the course, about anything within it, just let me know. I'd be happy to help you guys out. Mike asks if this is included in the Redchip membership. Yes, if you are a pro member, not a core member, if you're a pro member on Redchip Poker, this is included. However, not all parts are in there yet. I believe the final part will be released in July. So if you're looking for more immediacy, also the pro version, the one in the pro membership does not include any of the exercises, the 70% spreadsheet, or any of that kind of stuff. Bum, bum, bum. Julian, you are very welcome. Thank you. John asks, are these books or computer programs? This entire thing is all videos. And then obviously the homework and stuff is all PDF stuff. So you can all do it. You can do it on your computer. You can use Flopzilla if you want. You can use other programs as well. I believe Poker Cruncher will work if you're on Mac. All of that stuff works. Mike asks if this employs Flopzilla. You betcha. We do a lot of work with Flopzilla in this one. Actually, I know we do use some. Actually, now thinking about it, I know I use Flopzilla a lot for the exercises. I think for the actual coursework itself, I use more of a spreadsheet, and I can get you that if you need to. If you get the course, shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to send that over to you. Michael, you are very welcome. Edward, I'm not sure why it says that. I don't know why it says that there's only 24 minutes left. I don't know why the heck the software says that. But no, it'll be up for a couple of days. Al asks if he needs Flopzilla. You don't need Flopzilla, but Flopzilla is going to help a ton with the homework. If you don't have a PC, right, if you're on a Mac or something, then like I said, Poker Cruncher is another really good viable option. Tim, you are very welcome. Lucy, that is 100% correct. If you watch really, really good players play, it can sometimes look a little bit fishy, right? Because you're thinking, oh my goodness, they are betting so wide, and this dude is calling super wide, and why the heck are they taking these hands down? Oddly enough, it's because they're playing correctly. As weird as that sometimes seems. Oh, Jeff, don't worry about it, my man. I know this is called the 1%, but honestly, in terms of people that actually understand any of this stuff, I mean, we're talking about the 0.0001% stuff. Don't you worry at all. All right, y'all. Perfect. Bunch of thank yous, guys. You are so welcome. Thank you so much for hanging out today. One thing, remember, before you bounce, I do want to give y'all that freebie I was talking about earlier, right? So my custom 70% cheat sheet, a lot of the stuff we talked about today, this is going to be the download. Let me share that in the chat. Share file. Okay, so this is the free download. Definitely make sure to save this to your computer and reference it at least occasionally. So in it, we break it down in terms of like the common ratios and frequencies for every single street. So again, we break it down in terms of how many betting combos should you have on the flop, turn, and river. This is just assuming very simple triple barreling, and it breaks it down on a value to bluff metric. Makes it very easy to kind of see how some common ranges should be firing on all three streets. And not only do we have this for betting, but when you get to the bottom half of it, you also get into continuing, right? So if you're going to call pre-flop and you face 3 barrels, here is commonly how you should be breaking down your continuance. This gives you some really nice starting points. And you can have some fun seeing how things look as you get really wide pre-flop, and it gives you a nice starting point for getting started from there. And that is going to wrap it up. So again, I thank you guys so much for hanging out today. I really hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a lot. And remember, this stuff is complex. This stuff takes some time. But this is the work that will make you an absolute pain in the ass. And this will honestly prepare you for moving up, playing against tougher players, and getting to have a legitimate strategy. Stop just guessing. Stop just trying to hit hands. Start putting in the work that's actually going to help you build something truly foundational and something that you really can't crack. And again, you build it once, and this is stuff that you use for the rest of your poker career. So again, definitely make sure to pick out the course if it seems up your alley, if you see the value in it, if you're like, yeah, I can definitely see how this would be helpful. I definitely need help understanding not only yourself, right? And that's part of the other thing. The course is going to help you build and protect your own strategy, but in it, you're also going to work through what are the common issues that your opponents have. And it, again, helps you with that deviation, understanding when you should deviate from the 70%, when you should get into bluffing a tremendous amount more, and just as importantly, when you should be bluffing a little bit less. So again, if this is up your alley, if you're interested in it, splitsuit.com/APT will take you directly to it. And again, make sure to use the code APT to save $100 right this moment. So again, that's going to wrap up. Anyone have any questions at all? I'll stick around for another minute or two. But again, I really appreciate you guys hanging out. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, again, the course is an absolute slam dunk. I definitely think you're going to enjoy it. And again, pick it up, watch it this weekend, get to work, and I can't wait to hear how it helps you in your game. Lucy asks, how long is the code valid? Again, I think about a week. Tom, you are super, super welcome. Thank you, my man. Enjoy the course. I think you're really going to enjoy it, seriously. And one of the things I might suggest, watch it all like over a weekend, and then over the next like month, watch a couple videos per week, right? So you kind of watch it all, get the big picture, wash over it in a weekend, and then start refining from there. Maybe every week, watch 2 videos, work through 2 hands, do the in-depth stuff. That's going to be a really good, strong way to get it to sink in. Carlos says, how can I stop tilting? All right, you want the tough answer? Tough answer is ask why every single time you start to feel that tilt. And that's going to tilt you even more at first, but you need to understand why you're tilting. You know, some people tilt out of entitlement, some people tilt out of losing a pot, and I mean, people tilt for all sorts of different reasons. Heck, I used to tilt because fish got lucky, not even against me, but because fish were getting lucky in general. And I really didn't like when people got lucky, and I felt like I never did, which is just complete nonsense. We all get lucky to some extent. So understand what your trigger is, understand what the rationale is, and then understand that all tilt does is destroy you. Remember, in life, you only control two things, your actions and your reactions. You can't control that a fish got lucky. You can't control anything other than the fact that you can control how you react to whatever that tilting behavior was. That you can control. Duarte, I really hope I pronounced that properly. You are very, very welcome. And hello from Mississippi. Not quite the same weather as Portugal, I'm sure, but I would love to go to Portugal someday. JL says, if I buy now, will I always have access? Yes. So when you purchase the course, you get a free not free downloadable. You get the downloadable right that moment. So you download all the videos, you watch them when you want to. It also comes with streaming on Gumroad, which is really, really helpful if you decide, I just want to watch this when I'm out and about. I don't want to download this to my phone, but I want to access it later. Yeah, you get all that. And yes, you totally own it. That's the other benefit of not getting it through a pro, of getting it through here, is that you get the download. Theo says, I have Poker Cruncher. Will that work? You betcha. Mike asks, can red shippers buy the exercises? Yeah, just shoot me an email. Carlos, you are super welcome. Gabriel says, James, it is too advanced, or is it easy to get? It is a little bit complicated at first, but if you were able to kind of like follow along with what we did in this webinar, you're going to get the overall course stuff. If this felt completely unbearable, you're still going to get the core stuff. It's going to take probably 2 or 3 watches, though. Honestly, I read The 1% twice, the original book. So it's based upon the book by Ed Miller. And I read the original manuscript twice before it really started to sink in deeply. I had to read it twice, and then I had to do a bunch of exercises. And then I'm like, holy crap, this is huge. And I still went back and forth in my head for quite some time trying to figure out, is this too much? Is this right? Is this only for 10, 20 players? And I mean, everyone needs it at minimum to understand the foundation. If you don't understand the foundation, your deviations are nothing other than just wishy-washy nonsense. Gabriel, you are very, very welcome. Mike says, I play live one too, and my bankroll is very small, about $1,000. Will the course lead me to a high variance strategy? I can't really handle a high risk strategy. So Mike, let me ask you what the alternative is. And I do this totally respectfully. So what is a higher risk strategy? Getting in there, having proper frequencies, and losing some pots, or blinding yourself into oblivion because you're trying to catch monsters. Monsters rarely ever come, and essentially you spend the entire night folding, you're down a buy-in and a half, and you really haven't seen other than a couple of set mines that failed. I look at that as extremely high risk strategy. This allows me to find situations where I can bluff, where I can fight for pots that other people don't want to fight for, and I can pick up a lot of small to medium-sized pots that pad my win rate, and I don't really have to risk all that much. Remember, we're not talking about firing all-in bluffs every other hand. We're talking about situations where we're firing in spots where most people wouldn't, because our opponent's still folding too much and they don't understand what our frequencies are, and as such, we can just pick up a lot of these small pots. So, you said you have 5 buy-ins at 1-2. It's a little bit, I mean, honestly, it's not a bankroll in general. So as long as you have real life that can pad that, right? Like you have a job and you can continue feeding your bankroll for a while with that job. If all you have is 5 buy-ins to your name, stop playing poker immediately. Seriously, don't buy the course. Don't play any more poker until you have a legitimate bankroll. But if you can pad it with real life money, this is a slam dunk, no question. I'm very, very serious about people not making financially irresponsible plays. Please don't do that. Bruce says waiting for big hands is higher risk. I 100% agree with you, my man. Bruce asks, is this all in Ed's book and this just makes it easier? A large majority of it, but honestly, I did this and built this in a way that it wouldn't be a pure rehash. Okay, my whole goal was to take Ed's work, and mind you, I did this with permission. I'm not copyright jacking or anything like that. I wanted to take the original work, show the respect to it, of course, that it's due, and then expand it where I felt it needed expansion. So there were a lot of things in the original text that I felt, if expanded differently, would feel more applicable to people's games, particularly things like 1-2 Live and 2-5 Live, and even, smaller online games like 50 No Limit. So my whole goal was to make it more applicable to that, and also to explain some of the situations on why we do some of the things we do. I felt like, clearly the original text was great, and it's clearly based on applications, but I wanted it to feel a little more of a pure bridge between GTO and exploitative versus it feeling like just GTO without pure GTO math behind it. I wanted it to kind of bridge that gap a little bit more. Mike, I definitely agree. It can be a little tricky your first time through, but anything that's worth doing is going to be a little difficult. Jose says, is the replay available for this? No, the replay won't be available until tomorrow. You're getting an email tomorrow. Bruce says, I missed again, basic and pure. Oh, no stress. So pure has a little bit more to it. X out of here real quick. So Pure has everything that the basic does, right? The 10 video course, the 70% spreadsheet, the cheat sheet that I just gave you today, and also the exercises and the answer keys. But Pure also comes with 5 extra in-depth hand breakdowns using this model. It comes with 2 breakdowns of your own hands. So you send the hands in, get them broken down. Really, really good if some hands are like driving you bonkers. And also comes with bonuses in terms of my Unfolding Poker ebook and audiobook, the private Q&A I did, which is pretty much no one has seen. It is very, very small audience, which I really, really liked actually. And the Playing versus Unknowns webinar, which is like 2.5 hours and really, really good. So clearly, using your back pocket 1% strategy against unknowns is really good, but this really also helps you kind of get out of just playing against unknowns and figuring out how do I turn an unknown into a known player much, much quicker. Very, very beneficial. And again, the APT code works for Pure as well. Sumit says, James, I feel like I'm a winning 1-2 live and losing player 1-2 online. I just heard you mention that indirectly. Can you talk a bit more? Okay, 1-2 live is a very easy game. And I don't say that disrespectfully. It's just whenever you have the smallest game in a room, that's inherently going to be the easiest one, right? That's why 2 no limit and 5 no limit online are extremely simple, because it's the smallest game, it's the lowest barrier to entry, and the most amount of people are probably going to play that. 1-2 online is 200 no limit, and that is an extremely tough game on almost every single room. So those two, even though they're the same stakes, $1, $2, are vastly, vastly different in terms of game composition and average skill level per player. So please don't think that those two things are going to be synonymous and that what you would use in one is going to be exactly to the next. And even more so because when you're playing live, the average open raising size is much, much larger. That's going to shrink SPRs differently. 1-2 online, typically you're talking about 2 to 3 big blind opens. Live, you're talking about 5 to 7 big blind opens a lot of the time. So those are very, very different things. Carlos, you are very welcome. Unfortunately, I don't own the Poker Bank. I really wish I did. It's an amazing resource. But I've just kind of been their video dude for, goodness, long time. I want to say like 6 years. That can't be right. It might be 6 years. Maybe 5. But you're very, very welcome. I'm glad I can be a part of that. Chris says, thanks, James, for the webinar. Each time I tune into one of your webinars, I'm challenged and I learn new concepts. Thanks. You are super welcome, Chris. I love helping people expand their poker brain. Jeremy says, and Submit, you are very welcome. Jeremy says, pot size bets are rare where I play. Can I adapt this strategy for half pot c-bets, or should I always be c-betting pot size? Okay. First and foremost, you don't have to do anything. Okay, so I don't want you to feel like every bet you make going forward has to be pot size, nor do I want you to feel like you can never bet half. What I want you to take away is these ratios are based upon firing for full pot or around full pot, right? And it's based upon working it back from the river to the turn and the turn to the flop and the flop out onward. So given that, I don't want you to feel like any bet size is off the table. You just have to understand what is the value to bluff ratio for that bet size, and then decide, are you playing this from a back pocket, protect your frequencies standpoint, or are you making a specific bet size to attack a specific player, right? So are you making an exploitative decision to change your bet size? If that's the case, you probably already have a pretty good idea on what your value to bluff ratio should look like, and you're deciding that that bet size is going to be the highest EV line available. So again, I know it's kind of a long-winded answer to say don't get wrapped up in thinking it's totally black and white, because it's not, but hopefully that's a good starting point for you. Richard said, I see the price on basic, but what's the price on pure? So pure is normally $3.99, and if you use APT, it will just be $2.99 because APT takes $100 off the price. Good question. Ivan says, thank you so much. You are very welcome, Ivan. Mike asks, is there an optimal VPIP ratio? No. When you're playing full ring, normally I like a VPIP that's somewhere between 14 to 17 for like just tags and stuff. 6 max, I like that to be kind of in the low 20s. Good. Any other last minute questions, guys? Otherwise, I am very, very tired and need a snack. Going once, going twice. All right, guys. I want to say thank you so much again for hanging out. I know this ran longer than expected. That being said, it should always be expected. I always tend to run long on these things, but once I get going, I just love hanging out with y'all and getting to chit-chat poker at this level. This is always a lot of fun. So if you guys need anything at all, please don't hesitate to let me know. Again, you're going to get the replay email tomorrow. This code, the APT code, is not going to be live forever. So please, if you're interested, do it sooner than later so you don't miss it. Once I get rid of the code, I'm not putting it back on. Okay. And that's just, I have to be truthful to that. I don't want people sending me an email in, late June and saying, hey, I want to use that code. It will be gone 100% by that point. So if you want it, make sure to use it. Otherwise, again, thank you guys so much. I really hope you enjoyed. And again, I hope you enjoy the exploration. Continue to do this work. Even if you just break apart one hand per week, it will go so far. Okay. Thank you guys so much. Hey, hopefully you had fun. And as always, good luck out there and happy grinding.